Hey there, tonight we're diving into the strange traditions of Aztec warriors, where what you're about to discover is that their elaborate rituals were steeped in purpose and precision, far beyond the blood-soaked legends. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. You're standing in the bustling heart of Tenochtitlan, where the air hums with the energy of a city always on the brink of something epic. It's a place where young boys, maybe even you, are teetering on the edge of becoming warriors. The debate swirls around town like the aroma of street food. Do you start your warrior training at 15 or 17? Trust me, this isn't just a minor detail. It's the sort of question that could spark an all-night debate over a jug of pulque. The Aztecs had a knack for turning life into a series of rites of passage, and for boys, this meant trading in your childhood games for something a bit more serious. We're talking about training with wooden weapons, not because they were particularly eco-friendly, but because it was a way to hone skills without, accidentally skewering your buddy in practice. Think of it as the original Nerf warfare, only with a lot more at stake. As you swing that wooden macuahuitl, you're not just learning the art of war, you're stepping into a world where economic and social pressures are the real puppet masters. The Aztecs had an early version of what we'd call a military-industrial complex. The warrior path wasn't just a noble calling. It was a career move with pretty high stakes. Your success in battle could elevate your family's status faster than you can say, tribute system. And let's face it, the promise of riches and respect is a pretty compelling motivator when you're staring down a future in the cornfields. But let's not get too swept up in the romance of it all. Sure, tales of Aztec warriors are dripping with grandeur, but the reality was a lot grittier. Training was relentless, tough as old jerky, and there was no guarantee of glory. The pressure to perform was as real as the risk of ending up as a human sacrifice if you failed to capture enemies alive. Yeah, that was a thing. Capturing, not killing, was the golden rule because your worth as a warrior was measured in captives, not corpses. And here's a kicker. While we like to think of warriors as lone wolves, you were very much part of a pack. You lived, trained, and fought with a group, creating bonds that ran deeper than the obsidian on your future weapons. This camaraderie was the backbone of Aztec society, ensuring that when you went into battle, you did so with a fierce sense of loyalty and shared purpose. It's easy to romanticize the warrior's life, imagining yourself draped in exotic feathers and wielding weapons that gleamed in the sun. But let's not ignore the gritty details. Behind the legends were real teenagers grappling with the expectations of a society that demanded nothing less than excellence. For every triumphant warrior tale, there were countless others who struggled under the weight of what it all meant. So, as you stand there, wooden weapon in hand, you're not just a kid playing pretend. You're at the crossroads of history, where personal ambition meets the demands of an empire. It's a heady mix of excitement, fear, and the unknown. And whether you start at 15 or 17, the path ahead is one that promises both glory and peril in equal measure. And just as you're contemplating that crossroads, let's dive into the shiny, sharp heart of the Aztec warrior's toolkit, the atlatl and the macuahuitl. These aren't just weapons. They're the ultimate blend of art, science, and a dash of please don't drop this on your foot. The atlatl, for starters, is essentially an ancient spur thrower that could propel a dart with enough force to seriously reconsider your life choices if you were on the receiving end. Picture a wooden lever about 2 feet long, intricately carved because, hey, if you're going to throw a spear, you might as well do it with style. Now, before you dismiss this as a mere stick, consider this. The atlatl could hurl a projectile over 100 meters, a distance that would make even a modern-day javelin thrower pause mid-stride. The secret sauce here is leverage, transforming a simple arm motion into a projectile-launching powerhouse. It's like the difference between flicking a paper football and launching a rocket. And let's not forget the psychological edge. There's nothing quite like the sight of a volley of darts slicing through the air to make your opponents think twice about charging. Then there's the macuahuitl, a weapon that sounds like it should come with a warning label and a waiver. Think of it as a wooden sword, but instead of a blade, you've got rows of razor-sharp obsidian shards embedded along the edges. Obsidian, by the way, isn't just pretty volcanic glass. It's sharp enough to make your shaving razor look like a butter knife. Archaeologists have found macuahuitls capable of decapitating a horse with one swing. So yeah, not exactly your average backyard baseball bat. But here's the kicker. These bad boys weren't just off-the-shelf purchases. Crafting a macuahuitl required a meticulous process involving skilled artisans and a fair bit of economic investment. Obsidian was prized for its cutting ability, but it wasn't exactly growing on trees. The Aztecs had to source it from regions like Pachuca, over 100 kilometers away from Tenochtitlan. Transporting it wasn't just a logistical headache. It was an economic endeavor that involved bartering, trade alliances, and a fair amount of haggling. The warrior's armor, on the other hand, was a masterclass in understated elegance. Think of it as the original performance wear. Forget steel and chainmail. The Aztecs knew the value of cotton, crafting quilted armor known as ikkahuapili. Yes, you heard that right, cotton. But before you dismiss it as a soft option, remember that multiple layers could stop arrows and obsidian blades, offering the flexibility of a yoga outfit with the defensive power of a medieval knight. It was light, breathable, and perfect for the scorching sun of the Valley of Mexico. Now, let's talk economics, because maintaining an army wasn't just about showing up with a sharp stick and a can-do attitude. The logistics of outfitting warriors with these complex tools and armor were daunting. The production of weapons and armor was a full-fledged industry, with workshops buzzing like beehives. Craftsmen were the unsung heroes of the battlefield, ensuring that every warrior was equipped with the necessary gear. And this wasn't just for love of the empire. It was about the tribute system and maintaining social status. A well-equipped warrior was a walking billboard for his family's wealth and influence. Yet this romantic vision of the fearsome Aztec warrior obscures the gritty reality. These warriors weren't just born, they were financed. The cost of outfitting oneself with weapons and armor was significant, a fact often glossed over in the grand narratives of conquest and glory. A macuahuitl wasn't just handed out like free samples at a market. It was a symbol of status, a testament to a family's resources and connections. So next time you picture an Aztec warrior, don't just see the feathers and obsidian. Think of the economic machine humming in the background. Remember the artisans shaping each shard of obsidian with precision, the traders navigating treacherous routes to supply essential materials, and the families investing in their sons' martial futures. It's a story of grit and grind, where the sheen of the obsidian is matched only by the sweat of those who crafted and wielded it. And as we dig deeper into the Aztec military machine, let's not forget that behind every weapon and every suit of armor, there's a story of survival, resourcefulness, and the relentless pursuit of prestige. In the next segment, we'll pull back the curtain even further, exploring the strategies and tactics that turn these warriors into legends. Stay tuned, because the journey's just getting started. Now, as we peel back another layer of the Aztec military phenomenon, let's wade into the world of ceremonial warfare. This is where things get as colorful as they are bloody. Welcome to the Flower Wars, a term that sounds like it belongs in a botanical garden, but was actually more of a PR-friendly name for a strategic bloodbath. These battles, or Zachiatl, were less about territorial expansion and more about ritual and prestige. Imagine warfare that's part performance art, part political chess game, and part brutal reality TV. Why call them flower wars, you ask? Well, the Aztecs had a flair for poetic language, and flower symbolized the beauty and ephemerality of life itself. But don't let the name fool you. These wars were as lethal as they were symbolic. The main goal wasn't to annihilate the enemy, but to capture prisoners for religious sacrifices. Yep, human sacrifice, because nothing says divine favor like offering a few captives to the gods. And let's face it, in a world where your next harvest depends on celestial goodwill, you'd probably hedge your bets too. Now, the political intrigue behind these battles was as complex as a Game of Thrones plotline. The Aztecs and their neighboring city-states, like Tlaxcala, used these skirmishes to maintain alliances, demonstrate military prowess, and crucially, keep the gods appeased. These weren't spontaneous outbreaks of violence. They were carefully orchestrated events, almost like the Olympics of warfare. And just like any major event, they required logistics, planning, and a fair bit of pageantry. But let's get real about the human cost. While the flower wars were wrapped in layers of ritual significance, the stakes were deadly serious. Capturing a warrior alive was a badge of honor, but for the captured, it was a one-way ticket to the sacrificial altar. It's easy to romanticize the idea of glorious battle, but the reality was a bloody conveyor belt of human lives, each one a lifeline to the gods. The Aztecs believed that the sun god, Huitzilopochtli, needed nourishment in the form of human hearts to keep the world from plunging into eternal darkness. Talk about pressure. And while we're debunking myths, let's tackle the idea that Aztec warfare was purely about conquest. Sure, they were expanding their empire faster than a viral TikTok trend, but the flower wars were a different beast. These were ritualistic, almost theatrical, serving more as a political tool than a land-grabbing exercise. It was less about the physical spoils of war and more about the symbolic victory. Think of it as a way to keep the military sharp, the guards happy, and the allies on their toes. Now, human sacrifice. It's a topic that tends to overshadow everything about the Aztecs, like an awkward uncle at a family reunion. But in the context of warfare, it was deeply intertwined with their belief system and societal structure. Sacrifices were seen as a necessary exchange, a cosmic transaction to sustain the universe. And while it's easy to look back with horror, consider the Aztec perspective. This was a sacred duty, not senseless slaughter. The economics of sacrifice also can't be ignored. The Aztec economy was fueled by tribute from conquered peoples, but it was also sustained by the symbolic capital of sacrifice. Each act of offering was a reaffirmation of power and divine favor, a way to reinforce the social hierarchy and the ruler's legitimacy. Sacrifices were public spectacles, attended by the masses, and serving as a reminder of the emperor's divine mandate. Now, let's not sugarcoat it. This was a brutal system that thrived on fear and faith in equal measure. The flower wars, with their blend of spectacle and savagery, were a crucial element of Aztec diplomacy. They projected power while maintaining a delicate balance with neighboring states. You might think of it as a form of ancient diplomacy with a side of ritualized violence. Because in the world of the Aztecs, nothing said, "Let's keep the peace," quite like a ritual sacrifice. As we dig deeper into the spiritual and ceremonial aspects of Aztec warfare, it's clear that these battles were more than just exercises in brute force. They were deeply embedded in the cultural and religious fabric of the time, a way to navigate the complex web of alliances, enmities, and divine expectations. And while the flower wars may seem like a bizarre footnote in history, they were a testament to the Aztecs' extraordinary ability to intertwine warfare, politics, and religion into a single, cohesive strategy. So, as we wrap our minds around the concept of warfare as ritual, let's not lose sight of the human stories behind the obsidian blades and feathered headdresses. These were real people, living in a world where the spiritual and the everyday were inseparable, where every battle was a step closer to the gods, and every sacrifice a reminder of the fragile balance of power and belief. As we continue this journey into the heart of Aztec civilization, remember that behind the grandeur and the gore were individuals driven by the same desires and fears that have shaped human history across the ages. And with that, stay tuned for more as we unravel the tactics and strategies that made the Aztecs a force to be reckoned with. From the clash of obsidian blades in ritual warfare to the fine line between glory and grim reality, the life of an Aztec warrior was more than just a cycle of battle and sacrifice. It was a ladder, and each rung was a step toward prestige or a plunge into obscurity. Let's get real about the rewards and risks, shall we? In the Aztec world, success in battle wasn't just a pat on the back or a nod from the emperor. Oh no, it could mean a plot of land or a fancy feathered cloak, the kind that screamed, "Look at me, I'm a big deal." We're talking about the tangible perks of being a warrior, a system that would make even the most ambitious career ladder climber blush. Capturing enemies alive was your ticket to promotions and privileges, a kind of ancient LinkedIn endorsement, if you will. The hierarchy was as intricate as a game of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec ball game that was part sport, part religious ritual, and all complicated. At the top of this martial food chain sat the elite jaguar and eagle warriors. These guys weren't just playing dress-up. Their attire symbolized their prowess. Wearing jaguar skins or eagle feathers wasn't a fashion statement, it was a declaration of might. And it wasn't just about looking good, it was about the perks. We're talking special seats at events, exemption from certain taxes, and a lifestyle that most could only dream of. But here's where we debunk the noble savage myth that paints all Aztecs as egalitarian warriors living in harmony with nature. While it's tempting to romanticize the image of the Aztec warrior, let's not gloss over the harsh grind behind the glamour. The truth is, the reward system wasn't just a way to keep warriors motivated, it was a tool of social control. Success in battle could propel a commoner to the upper echelons, but it also kept the peasant class striving for the carrot dangled just out of reach. Achieving the rank of jaguar or eagle warrior wasn't just about personal glory, it was a ticket to influence and power within the broader Aztec society. These warriors often became leaders, shaping the policies that governed their world. They weren't merely pawns in the emperor's game. They were key players, sometimes even kingmakers. Their influence extended beyond the battlefield, affecting everything from trade to diplomacy. Of course, not everyone could rise to such heights. For every warrior who donned a jaguar pelt, there were countless others who remained in the shadows, their dreams of glory dashed against the hard reality of warfare. The risk was real. The penalty for failure wasn't just a bruised ego, but potentially a one-way trip to the sacrificial altar. It was a brutal meritocracy where success brought rewards, but failure could mean the ultimate price. The Aztec warrior ethos was deeply woven into the fabric of their civilization, influencing everything from their economy to their religious practices. The pressure to succeed in capturing enemies wasn't just a personal burden, it was a societal expectation. The entire structure of Aztec society leaned heavily on the warrior's ability to meet these demands. After all, the tributes from conquered lands filled the coffers, funded the empire, and kept the guards appeased. So, while we might admire the feathered splendor and the allure of the warrior elite, let's not forget the gritty reality of the system they supported. This was a world where personal ambition was both a driving force and a double-edged sword, where every victory was a step toward greatness, but every misstep could lead to ruin. As we peer deeper into the layers of Aztec society, the line between legend and reality blurs, revealing a civilization as complex as it is captivating. The reward system wasn't just about personal gain. It was a reflection of the broader social order, a way to reinforce the hierarchy that kept the empire running. And while the myth of the noble Aztec warrior endures, the truth is far more nuanced and infinitely more human. Stay tuned, because we've only just begun to uncover the intricacies of the Aztec military machine and its impact on their civilization's structure. There's more to explore, from the economic engines that powered their conquests to the political maneuvers that kept them in power. So keep your obsidian blades sharp and your curiosity sharper, because this journey through history is just heating up. So, as we unravel the intricacies of Aztec society, let's pivot to a turning point that reshaped their world forever, the Spanish conquest. The conquest, that chapter often depicted as the inevitable clash of civilization and savagery, a narrative that's as overplayed as a pop song on repeat. But let's dig beneath the surface, because the reality is far more tangled, and spoiler alert, it wasn't just about superior European firepower. In 1519, Hernán Cortés landed on the Gulf Coast with a motley crew of around 500 soldiers, a few cannons, and a determination that would make even the most ardent Instagram influencer blush. What followed was not a mere military campaign, but a complex tapestry of alliances, betrayals, and yes, a fair bit of luck. The Aztecs, under Emperor Moctezuma Roman II, faced not just the Spaniards, but a coalition of indigenous peoples who were less than thrilled about being under Aztec thumb. The myth of the Aztecs' inferiority in battle deserves a serious side-eye. Yes, the Spanish had steel swords, gunpowder, and horses, tools that the Aztecs had never encountered. But the heart of the matter was the political and social landscape. The Aztec Empire was a patchwork of city-states bound more by force than by loyalty. Enter Cortés, who was savvy enough to exploit these fractures. He forged alliances with disgruntled tribes like the Tlaxcalans, who were more than happy to see the Aztecs knock down a peg or two, effectively flipping the empire's own strategy against it. And then there was disease, the silent conqueror. Smallpox ripped through the Aztec population like a viral tweet, decimating communities and leaving chaos in its wake. The epidemic struck at the heart of Aztec society, wiping out not just warriors, but leaders, priests, and everyday people. Imagine losing up to 90% of your population in a matter of years. Talk about a logistical nightmare. The pandemic weakened the social fabric, making it increasingly difficult to muster an effective defense against the Spanish and their allies. Now, let's not give all the credit to germs and guns. The downfall of the warriors also hinged on the Aztecs' own strategic missteps. Moctezuma's initial indecision and attempts to appease the Spaniards, possibly viewing them as divine or semi-divine, created a power vacuum. This hesitation allowed Cortés to gain a foothold in Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, a city that was as much a wonder as it was a warren of political intrigue. In 1521, after a brutal siege, the Spaniards and their allies captured Tenochtitlan, marking the official fall of the Aztecs. But let's debunk the Hollywood fantasy of a simple good vs. evil tale. This wasn't some epic showdown where the underdog miraculously triumphs. It was a complex collision of worlds where fate, fortune, and human folly intertwined. The Aztecs were not merely vanquished by superior technology, but by a confluence of factors that included strategic miscalculation, opportunistic alliances, and the devastating impact of disease. Yet, despite this defeat, the legacy of the Aztec warriors endures. They're often romanticized as noble savages, a trope that glosses over their sophistication and the harsh realities of their society. But let's not forget the grit behind the glamour, their skill in hand-to-hand combat, their strategic acumen, and their ability to weave warfare into the very fabric of their religion and culture. Today, the Aztec warrior remains a symbol of resilience and bravery, a testament to a civilization that once thrived at the crossroads of culture and conflict. Their story reminds us that history isn't just a series of triumphs and tragedies, but a complex dance of human ambition, power, and the relentless march of time. So, as we wrap up our journey through the world of the Aztec warrior, let's leave with a few nuggets of wisdom. History is a mosaic, not a monolith. Each piece tells a part of the story, but the full picture requires depth and perspective. The fall of the Aztecs teaches us that power is never absolute. Alliances can be as fragile as they are formidable, and sometimes the smallest unseen enemy can topple the mightiest of empires. And finally, remember this. Behind every legend lies a truth, often more nuanced and infinitely more human than the myth. The Aztec warriors were real people, living in a world as complex and challenging as our own, driven by the same desires for glory, survival, and meaning. Their story is our story, a reflection of the enduring human spirit that continues to shape our world today. Thomas Jefferson was born in 1743, an era when powdered wigs were the height of fashion and leeches were considered a miracle cure-all. Growing up on a 5,000-acre plantation in Virginia, young Tom had the kind of childhood that makes modern helicopter parents sweat bullets. No strict bedtime or parental controls here, just endless fields to roam and a library that would make any bookworm drool. His father, Peter Jefferson, was a self-made man, a surveyor, and a cartographer who apparently didn't believe in doing things by halves. Peter's claim to fame, mapping the uncharted lands of Virginia, which was like Google Earth before the internet, minus the Wi-Fi and with a lot more mosquitoes. Jefferson's early education was as privileged as they come. He was tutored by the Reverend James Morey, a man who could teach Latin and Greek without breaking a sweat. Imagine a time when knowing ancient languages was cooler than nailing that tick-tock dance. By the time he was 16, Jefferson was off to the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, a place steeped in history, and apparently the scent of powdered wigs. The college was a hotbed of Enlightenment thinking, which means Jefferson was surrounded by more radical ideas than a modern-day coffee shop in Portland. Now, at William and Mary, Jefferson wasn't exactly the life of the party. In fact, he was about as socially awkward as a turtle at a rabbit race. While others were busy playing colonial beer pong, Jefferson was holed up with his books, diving deep into the works of Locke, Newton, and every other Enlightenment thinker he could get his hands on. He was the kind of guy who'd rather discuss the finer points of natural law than the latest gossip from the colonial dance floor. Despite his introverted nature, Jefferson did manage to make a few friends, or at least acquaintances who didn't mind his penchant for philosophical debates. One of them was George Wythe, a law professor who became Jefferson's mentor. Wythe was a serious dude, the first American law professor and a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He recognized Jefferson's potential and helped him channel all that intellectual energy into something more productive than just outsmarting his fellow students in debate. Jefferson's knack for languages was legendary. He could speak 5 languages fluently and read 2 others. This wasn't just a party trick, though it certainly could have been if he'd ever been invited to one. This linguistic prowess would later come in handy when he needed to draft documents that would resonate across continents, or at least confuse the British. His passion for languages was matched only by his love for architecture. Jefferson once said, "I prefer the dreams of the future better than the history of the past," which is a fancy way of saying he was more interested in designing cool buildings than reminiscing about his awkward teenage years. Now, let's address the elephant in the room: Jefferson's social skills, or lack thereof. The man was an introverted genius, the kind who'd rather write a 3,000-word essay on human rights than engage in small talk over tea. Legend has it that when Jefferson was appointed governor of Virginia, he gave speeches that were so complex, half the audience needed a translator. He was a man whose brain was wired for the big picture, the grand ideas, and sometimes that meant missing out on the little things, like how to make small talk. But here's the thing: Jefferson's social awkwardness was part of his charm. In a world where everyone was trying to outdo each other with wit and charm, Jefferson stood out by being unapologetically himself. He wasn't just the smartest guy in the room, he was the guy who redefined what it meant to be smart. Smart wasn't just about knowing things, it was about understanding them, questioning them, and using that knowledge to make the world a better place, even if it made him the last to be picked for colonial dodgeball. So, as Jefferson left the College of William and Mary, armed with more ideas than a revolutionary pamphlet, he was ready to take on the world, or at least the colonies. The stage was set for him to become one of the founding fathers of a new nation, a role that would require every ounce of that Enlightenment-fueled intellect and a good dose of patience for dealing with people who didn't quite get his long-winded speeches. But hey, nobody said starting a revolution was easy, especially when you're more comfortable with quill and parchment than with people. As Jefferson left the College of William and Mary, armed with more ideas than a revolutionary pamphlet, he was ready to take on the world, or at least the colonies. Fast forward a few years, and the stage was set for Tom to make his mark on history. But first, let's talk about how he stumbled into the spotlight, quill in hand. In 1775, Jefferson found himself in the Second Continental Congress, a gathering of the brightest minds, or at least the most opinionated, for what was essentially a revolutionary brainstorming session. It's like an 18th century think tank, except instead of free snacks and PowerPoint presentations, they had powdered wigs and parchment. And if you think your office meetings are chaotic, imagine trying to get 56 delegates from 13 colonies to agree on lunch, let alone independence. Now, Jefferson wasn't exactly the loudest voice in the room. In fact, he was probably the one in the corner, scribbling furiously, while others debated whether to send yet another strongly worded letter to King George Roman III. But hey, when you're plotting a rebellion, some people need to be the scribes, while others are the talkers. Jefferson, as it turns out, was about to become both, much to his chagrin. In June 1776, with tensions brewing and the colonies itching to break free like teenagers with curfews, Congress appointed a committee of 5 to draft the Declaration of Independence. Cue the dramatic music right. It sounds grand, but the reality was less glamorous. The committee included John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, Robert Livingston, and our boy, Thomas Jefferson. Now, Adams and Franklin were the seasoned pros, the kind of guys who could charm a room or argue circles around anyone. But when it came to writing, they turned to Jefferson, quiet genius who could turn a phrase like no other. Why Jefferson, you ask? Well, Adams later said it was because he had a reputation for literature, science, and a talent for composition. Translation: Jefferson was the wordsmith of the group, and let's face it, Adams was busy and Franklin had other, shall we say, pursuits. Besides, Jefferson had the knack for penning grand ideas with the kind of eloquence that could make the heavens weep, or at least make a monarch nervous. But here's the kicker. Jefferson didn't want the gig. He practically begged Adams to take over, citing his own lack of experience and preference for staying out of the limelight. Adams, however, was having none of it. He insisted Jefferson was the man for the job, and with a bit of cajoling, okay, more like relentless persuasion, Jefferson reluctantly agreed. And so, the reluctant writer was tasked with crafting the most important breakup letter in history. Now, imagine Jefferson, holed up in a rented room in Philadelphia, quill in hand, trying to summarize the colony's grievances without sounding like a petulant teenager. No pressure, right? But Jefferson was up to the challenge, channeling all his Enlightenment-fueled fervor into the draft. Over the course of 17 days, he crafted a document that was part philosophy, part list of grievances, and all passion. It was a masterpiece in the making, even if it did have a few rough drafts. Meanwhile, the committee was busy having what can only be described as the 18th century equivalent of a writer's workshop. They debated, they suggested edits, and they even nitpicked Jefferson's choice of words. It was like a literary roast, with Jefferson as the main course. But through it all, Jefferson remained focused, determined to get it right. After all, this wasn't just any document, it was the foundation of a new nation. One of the more hilarious debates, the inclusion of a passage condemning the slave trade. Jefferson, a slave owner himself, had included a scathing critique of the practice, probably thinking it would make him look progressive. But the reality was more complex than that. The passage was struck out, not because the committee was all for slavery, but because they feared it would alienate southern colonies. Politics, as always, was a messy business. Finally, on July 2, 1776, the Continental Congress voted for independence. 2 days later, they adopted Jefferson's declaration, albeit with a few edits and omissions. It was like handing in your term paper only to have the professor mark it up with red ink. Still, what emerged was a document that would stand the test of time, a brilliant manifesto that declared, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." A bold statement, even if the reality was a tad more complicated. As the declaration was read aloud to the public, Jefferson was probably hiding somewhere, avoiding the spotlight like a cat avoiding a bath. He was the reluctant hero, the man behind the curtain, whose words would echo through history. And while the world celebrated, Jefferson quietly returned to Virginia, content to let his words speak for themselves. His political star was on the rise, but he remained the introverted genius, more comfortable with ideas than applause. And so, Jefferson's role in crafting the Declaration of Independence was cemented. It was a moment of triumph, a testament to the power of words to inspire change. But this was just the beginning of Jefferson's political journey. There were more challenges to face, more myths to bust, and more history to make. So stay tuned, because the story of Thomas Jefferson is far from over. As Jefferson's political journey continued, he found himself on a ship bound for France in 1784, tasked with proving that diplomacy could be more than just a fancy word for awkward dinner parties. Picture Jefferson, the man who preferred quills to conversation, now navigating the choppy waters of international relations. It was like sending a cat to negotiate with dogs, a bold move, or an ill-conceived adventure. Let's dive into Jefferson's time in France, where he swapped the colonial parlors for Parisian salons and had his taste buds tested like never before. Jefferson arrived in Paris to serve as minister to France, a role that sounds prestigious, but was about as straightforward as a Rubik's Cube. His mission: secure trade agreements and maintain the fledgling alliance between the United States and France. The stakes were high, and Jefferson was ready to roll up his sleeves, or at least adjust his cravat, and get to work. But before we get too carried away, let's debunk the myth that Jefferson was a full-blown Francophile in love with everything French. The truth is, he had a complicated relationship with France, one built on admiration for their Enlightenment ideals, but a disdain for certain, culinary choices. Let's put it this way. Jefferson loved French culture the way one might appreciate abstract art, fascinated by its beauty, but not quite sure what to do with it. He was enamored with French architecture, music, and the arts, soaking in every bit of culture like a sponge. In his letters, he waxed poetic about French fashion and the intellect of its people. But when it came to French cuisine, Jefferson's enthusiasm took a nosedive. He famously quipped that the French diet was 1,000 snails short of a decent meal, opting instead to import American staples like corn and Virginia hams. It's safe to say Jefferson's palate was more accustomed to the hearty fare of the colonies than the delicate dishes of Paris. Despite his culinary grievances, Jefferson's time in France was transformative. He mingled with the intellectual elite, rubbing elbows with the likes of Voltaire and Diderot. His interactions broadened his horizons and deepened his commitment to Enlightenment principles. But let's not romanticize this too much. Jefferson wasn't just a starry-eyed idealist. He was a shrewd observer of the political landscape, taking notes on the French Revolution brewing beneath the surface. He saw firsthand the stark divide between the opulent French aristocracy and the impoverished masses, a sight that would later influence his views on governance and equality. Now, Jefferson's diplomatic escapades were not without their faux pas. Navigating the French court was like dancing through a minefield of manners, where a misplaced bow could spark a scandal. Jefferson, with his Virginia sensibilities and penchant for straightforwardness, found himself in a series of cultural missteps. He was once caught mispronouncing French words at a dinner party, causing a ripple of laughter among the guests. But instead of retreating into his shell, Jefferson took these moments in stride, learning from them and mastering the art of diplomacy with each passing day. One of Jefferson's biggest challenges was balancing American interests with French expectations. The French had been instrumental in supporting the American Revolution, and they expected their new allies to return the favor. However, Jefferson was acutely aware that young America was not in a position to repay favors with military might or financial aid. Instead, he focused on securing trade agreements, ensuring that American goods could be sold in European markets. It was a delicate dance of appeasement and assertion, with Jefferson walking the tightrope between gratitude and independence. And let's not forget the economic context of Jefferson's time in France. The American economy was still finding its footing, recovering from the financial strain of the Revolution. Meanwhile, France was teetering on the brink of bankruptcy, its lavish spending and costly wars draining the royal coffers faster than you can say, "Let them eat cake." Jefferson was acutely aware of these economic realities and knew that his mission in France was as much about securing economic stability as it was about maintaining political alliances. But what about the myth of Jefferson as a Francophile, a lover of all things French? While he certainly admired French culture, his experiences in France were not without their sobering moments. He witnessed the harsh realities of inequality and poverty, experiences that would later inspire his advocacy for a more egalitarian society back home. Jefferson's time in France was less about falling in love with a foreign culture and more about learning from it, adopting its best ideas while remaining critical of its flaws. In the end, Jefferson's diplomatic stint in France was a crash course in international relations, one that would shape his political ideologies for years to come. It was a journey of growth and discovery, of missteps and triumphs, all wrapped in the complexities of a rapidly changing world. And while Jefferson may have left France with a deeper appreciation for Enlightenment thought, he also returned to America with a renewed commitment to the principles of liberty and democracy, ideas that would define his legacy as a founding father. So there you have it, Thomas Jefferson's French adventure, a tale of diplomacy, cultural mishaps, and intellectual enlightenment. It was a chapter in his life that laid the groundwork for his future endeavors, both as a statesman and as a leader. But don't think for a second that this is the end of Jefferson's story. There's plenty more intrigue and political maneuvering to come, as our reluctant hero continues to navigate the turbulent waters of American independence. Stay tuned, because the saga of Thomas Jefferson is far from over. While Thomas Jefferson was busy soaking up Enlightenment ideals in France and dodging snails at dinner, destiny was plotting his return to the American political stage. Fast forward to 1801, and Jefferson had traded his diplomatic hat for the ultimate power trip, the presidency. But Thomas's journey to the White House wasn't merely a stroll through the Rose Garden. It was more like a roller coaster ride with more twists and turns than a colonial soap opera. So here's the kicker. Jefferson, the man who famously championed states' rights and feared a powerful central government like a cat fears water, ended up wielding presidential power with an iron quill. Jefferson's presidency is a tale of irony, ambition, and a little land deal you might have heard of, the Louisiana Purchase. This wasn't just any real estate transaction. It was the mother of all land grabs, adding a whopping 828,000 square miles to the United States for a cool $15 million. That's about 4 cents an acre, folks. Even in 1803, that was a steal. Now, let's break it down. Napoleon Bonaparte, the French emperor with a penchant for conquest and a soft spot for dramatic exits, needed cash to fund his European escapades. So he decided to cut his losses in the New World and offered up the Louisiana Territory. Jefferson, ever the opportunist, saw this as the chance of a lifetime. But here's the catch. Jefferson had to act fast, and there was no time to consult Congress. So, in a move that would make his state's rights-loving heart skip a beat, he flexed his executive muscle and sealed the deal himself. Critics were quick to point out the hypocrisy of Jefferson's actions. Here was a man who had railed against centralized power, now making unilateral decisions that would reshape the nation. But Jefferson had a knack for rationalizing his contradictions. In his mind, the purchase was an opportunity to create an empire of liberty that would secure America's future. Plus, who could resist the allure of doubling the nation's size with the stroke of a pen? It was like buying a mansion with a guest house, pool, and 10-car garage for the price of a fixer-upper. But wait, there's more. If the Louisiana Purchase was Jefferson's crowning achievement, the Embargo Act of 1807 was his political pratfall. Picture this. Jefferson, increasingly frustrated with British and French harassment of American ships, decided that the best way to teach these European bullies a lesson was to cut off trade entirely. The Embargo Act was supposed to be a masterstroke of economic warfare, a peaceful way to avoid getting dragged into a full-blown conflict. In practice, however, it was like trying to put out a fire by dousing it with gasoline. The act devastated the American economy, particularly in New England, where merchants watched their livelihoods go up in smoke. Exports plummeted from $108 million in 1807 to just $22 million in 1808, a staggering 80% drop. Jefferson's attempt at a peaceful resolution was more akin to shooting himself in the foot, leaving Americans to suffer the consequences. It was a classic case of good intentions paving the way to economic purgatory. But let's not forget the colorful cast of characters Jefferson had to deal with during his presidency. Pirates, for instance. Yes, you heard that right. The Barbary pirates, operating out of North Africa, had a nasty habit of capturing American ships and demanding ransom. Jefferson, fed up with paying tribute, sent the U.S. Navy to deal with them. It marked the first time the United States Navy flexed its muscles overseas, setting the stage for the country's future as a maritime power. The irony of Jefferson, a man who once envisioned a peaceful agrarian society, now overseeing naval battles, was not lost on his critics. And then there were the internal political battles. Jefferson faced fierce opposition from the Federalists, who saw him as a dangerous radical intent on dismantling the fledgling nation. The political climate was about as friendly as a barroom brawl, with partisan attacks flying faster than a musket ball. Jefferson, however, played the long game, using his political savvy to navigate the turbulent waters of early American politics. He was a master of the art of persuasion, employing charm, wit, and occasionally a bit of subterfuge to achieve his goals. Despite the controversies and contradictions, Jefferson's presidency left an indelible mark on the nation. The Louisiana Purchase set the stage for westward expansion, while the Embargo Act, despite its failure, highlighted the challenges of maintaining neutrality in a world dominated by European power struggles. Jefferson's actions, for better or worse, laid the groundwork for the United States' transformation into a continental power. Yet, the myth of Jefferson as a purely principled idealist is just that, a myth. In reality, he was a complex figure, one who embodied the contradictions of his era. He was a champion of liberty who owned slaves, a states' rights advocate who expanded federal power, and a man who believed in limited government, but wasn't afraid to wield authority when it suited his purposes. Jefferson's presidency was a testament to the messy, contradictory nature of politics, a reminder that leaders are often defined as much by their failures as by their successes. As Jefferson's presidency drew to a close, he left behind a nation that was stronger, larger, and more divided than ever. His vision of an agrarian paradise was giving way to the realities of an industrializing world, and the seeds of conflict were already being sown. But that's a story for another day. For now, let's tip our hats to Thomas Jefferson, the reluctant leader whose contradictions continue to fascinate and confound us. Stay tuned, because Jefferson's story isn't over yet. There's still more intrigue, more drama, and more myth-busting to come. As Jefferson packed his bags and left the White House in 1809, he probably hoped to leave behind the political roller coaster and settle into a life of tranquility at Monticello. But retirement for Jefferson was less about rest and more about returning to his intellectual roots. Monticello, his architectural masterpiece nestled in the rolling hills of Virginia, became the stage for his later life. It's as if Jefferson swapped his presidential quill for a gardener's hoe, determined to cultivate both crops and ideas. Now, Monticello was no ordinary farmhouse. It was the physical embodiment of Jefferson's Enlightenment ideals, a neoclassical retreat where Palladian symmetry met Virginian functionality. Jefferson, ever the tinkerer, filled it with gadgets and books, including a revolving bookstand and a great clock. It was the ultimate man cave for an 18th-century polymath. Yet, like Jefferson himself, Monticello was a place of contradictions. A symbol of enlightenment, it was built and maintained by the labor of enslaved people. Jefferson's retirement years were steeped in the dissonance of his ideals versus his reality. Speaking of contradictions, let's tackle the elephant in the room, Jefferson's views on slavery. Here was a man who penned the words, "All men are created equal," yet owned over 600 enslaved people over his lifetime. It's the kind of hypocrisy that makes your head spin faster than a weather vane in a hurricane. Jefferson publicly referred to slavery as a moral depravity and a hideous blot. Yet he couldn't bring himself to free his own enslaved workers, save for a few, including the Hemings family, who were likely his own children. It's a truth more uncomfortable than a wooden chair at a dinner party. So why didn't Jefferson, the great advocate of liberty, emancipate his slaves? The answer lies in a cocktail of economic dependency, societal norms, and personal convenience. The Virginia plantation economy was as reliant on slavery as a fish is on water. Monticello itself was not just Jefferson's home. It was a working plantation, cultivating tobacco, wheat, and other crops. The economic pressures of maintaining such an estate were immense, and Jefferson was often in debt. By the time of his death, he owed around $107,000, a staggering sum in those days. The financial realities of the time made the notion of freeing his enslaved workers akin to economic suicide. But let's not give Jefferson a free pass. His reluctance to act against slavery also reflected the insidious grip of racial ideology. He believed in the intellectual superiority of whites, a belief that was as flawed as it was pervasive in his era. These beliefs, while common, don't absolve him of responsibility. They serve as a stark reminder that even the most enlightened minds can be clouded by the prejudices of their time. Despite these glaring contradictions, Jefferson's legacy is not easily dismissed. His influence on the fledgling nation was profound. He championed the separation of church and state, a radical idea that has become a bedrock principle of American governance. His Louisiana Purchase doubled the size of the United States, although it was a move that also paved the way for the expansion of slavery into new territories. His vision of an agrarian republic, where independent farmers would be the backbone of democracy, still echoes in American political rhetoric. In his retirement, Jefferson also founded the University of Virginia, a testament to his belief in education as the keystone of a free society. The university was his brainchild, from the curriculum to the architecture, embodying his belief in secular education and the free exchange of ideas. It was a place where the young minds of a new nation could flourish, free from religious dogma and political interference. Jefferson saw education as the great equalizer, a tool to uplift individuals and empower them to participate meaningfully in democracy. As Jefferson aged, his correspondence with John Adams, once a fierce political rival, became a testament to the enduring power of dialogue and reconciliation. Their letters, totaling 158, covered everything from politics to philosophy, and they remain a fascinating study of two great minds reflecting on their shared experiences in shaping a nation. It's a heartening reminder that even the most bitter of enemies can find common ground and respect in the twilight of life. Jefferson's death on July 4, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, is the stuff of historical legend. It's the kind of poetic coincidence that makes you suspect divine intervention, or, at the very least, a flair for dramatic timing. This final act solidified his place in the pantheon of American founders, though it also heralded the beginning of a complex legacy that historians still grapple with today. So, what's the takeaway from Jefferson's life and legacy? He's the poster child for the complexities of the American experiment. A man of profound intellect and vision, yet deeply flawed by the standards of his own ideals. His contradictions make him a perfect candidate for both hero worship and meme-making. Whether you see him as a visionary leader or a hypocritical figure depends on which side of the historical lens you choose to focus. In the end, Thomas Jefferson is a reminder that history is never black and white. It's a tapestry woven from the threads of human ambition, folly, and contradiction. His story encourages us to question our own values and the legacies we leave behind. As we navigate our own turbulent times, perhaps that's the most enduring lesson Jefferson offers: the importance of striving for a society where all are truly created equal, even when the path to that ideal is fraught with the very contradictions that define Jefferson himself. So there you have it, the life and legacy of Thomas Jefferson, a man whose words continue to inspire, challenge, and occasionally baffle us. He's an enigma wrapped in a powdered wig, a founding father whose life was as complex as the nation he helped create. And if you find yourself pondering his contradictions, well, you're in good company. After all, grappling with the past is just a part of understanding the present. 15th century, Portugal was like a teenager with a new car and a full tank, stoked to explore, but not entirely sure where the road would lead. At the center of this maritime melodrama was a man named Vasco da Gama. Born around 1460, da Gama grew up in a world where the ocean was both a barrier and a promise. Portugal had a serious case of wanderlust, and Vasco was destined to be its star navigator. Forget the romantic sails and sunlit horizons. The real stories got more grit than glamour. Portugal, at the time, was like that kid on the block who's just discovered a treasure map. In the 15th century, the kingdom was a bustling hub with about 1 million people, and it had an economic itch that only the spice-rich East could scratch. The thrill was all about spices. Pepper, cloves, and cinnamon were the Bitcoin of their day. But there was a catch. Getting to these spices was harder than finding a parking spot in downtown Lisbon on a Saturday night. Controlling the spice trade was the European version of winning the lottery, and the Portuguese crown was all in, with King Manuel I at the helm, dreaming of an empire that'd make Julius Caesar look like a local councilman. Now, why was Portugal so obsessed with maritime exploration? Simple. The land route to India, the fabled source of spices, was basically a nightmare. It was controlled by the Ottomans and involved a series of toll booths that would make modern highway authorities blush. Plus, the Spanish were in the game too, and Portugal did not want to come second in the race of European expansion. They wanted to find a sea route to India, bypassing all the middlemen. The Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494 had already divided the known world between Spain and Portugal like a pie at Thanksgiving. Portugal got the east, Spain the west. So, the mission was clear. Sail east, young man. Enter Vasco da Gama, who was handed the keys to Portugal's exploratory ambitions in 1497. But before the grandeur of reaching India, there was the less glamorous business of getting ready for the trip. King Manuel I appointed him to lead the expedition, a bold choice given da Gama's resume was more or less a blank slate when it came to actual voyages. The logistics of a 15th century sea voyage were the stuff of nightmares. Think of it as planning a road trip, but instead of pit stops and gas stations, you're dealing with potential mutinies, scurvy, and the ever-present possibility of falling off the edge of the world, a genuine concern back then. The fleet consisted of 4 ships, São Gabriel, São Rafael, Berrio, and a supply ship. These weren't just floating vessels. They were floating fortresses, armed to the teeth with cannons, because you never knew when pirates or hostile locals might want to say hello. The São Gabriel was the flagship, a carrack weighing in at 120 tons, which sounds impressive until you consider it's like trying to sail a bathtub across the Atlantic. The preparation involved stocking up on everything, from food and water to beads and trinkets for trading. The ships carried enough provisions for 3 years, just in case someone forgot the map. They crammed in barrels of salted meat, hardtack biscuits, and wine. Yes, wine was practically part of the sailors' food pyramid, because water. Who needs it when you've got booze, right? Their food was a gastronomic horror show, with enough salt to rival a modern fast food chain. Anecdotes from the time paint a picture of chaos and ingenuity. Picture this: sailors packing their ships with live chickens to ensure fresh eggs. It was like a medieval version of a floating farm. And then there were the navigational tools. Forget GPS. These guys had astrolabes and compasses, which worked about as well as a sundial at midnight. It was a blend of science, art, and a whole lot of guesswork. The crew was a hardy bunch, numbering around 170, pulled from the dregs of society, outcasts, adventurers, and those with nothing to lose. They weren't exactly the cream of the crop, but they were brave or desperate enough to take on the uncertainties of the sea. And let's not forget the infamous ship biscuit, designed to last forever but more useful as a weapon than a meal. Gama's mission was audacious. He was to sail around the Cape of Good Hope, a feat that was more legend than reality in those days. The Cape wasn't called the Cape of Storms for nothing. The voyage was a massive gamble, a moonshot centuries before the term was invented. And why did Gama agree? Well, apart from the potential riches and glory, there was always the king's persuasion. When the king says jump, you jump, or in this case sail. As the fleet prepared to set sail in July 1497, there was no fanfare, no grand send-off. Just a prayer service at the church of Santa Maria de Belém, and off they went, leaving behind the rolling hills of Lisbon for the vast unknown. The journey was set to redefine not just maps, but the entire course of history. Vasco da Gama, a man with a mission, a motley crew, and a collection of ships that had seen better days, was about to become a legend. But first, he had to survive the journey. Leaving Lisbon behind, da Gama and his ragtag fleet sailed into the great unknown, where the ocean was less a friend and more an unpredictable houseguest who might wreck your place without warning. The first leg of their journey involved hugging the West African coast, a strategy as much about survival as it was about navigation. After all, these sailors were using maps that looked like they'd been sketched by a toddler with a crayon. Now, let's talk about those challenges. First up, scurvy. This infamous sailor's scourge wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a full-blown horror show. The lack of fresh produce turned the crew into unwilling participants in a grim game of, will my teeth fall out today? Spoiler alert, many did. Scurvy wasn't just about a vitamin C deficiency. It was about a complete breakdown in morale. Imagine trying to motivate a crew when half of them are too weak to stand, and the other half are wondering why the heck they signed up for this gig in the first place. But scurvy wasn't their only foe. Da Gama's leadership was tested as the crew's patience wore thin. The spectre of mutiny was as ever-present as the stench of unwashed bodies. The sailors, a colorful medley of misfits and desperados, were no strangers to rebellion. It's not like they signed up for a luxury cruise, but they certainly didn't expect to choke down salt pork while navigating waters that seemed to stretch into eternity. Add da Gama's bouts of seasickness into the mix, and you've got a recipe for discontent. Yes, even the great explorer had his moments of vulnerability, barfing over the side while trying to maintain a shred of dignity. The navigation was another ordeal altogether, with tools that were more grandma's attic than cutting-edge technology. Da Gama's lot relied on astrolabes, which were about as accurate as a fortune-teller at a county fair. The Cape of Good Hope wasn't just a blip on the map. It was a behemoth, a swirling cauldron of storms that had sent many a sailor to a watery grave. Dubbed the Cape of Storms by Bartolomeu Dias, this infamous stretch was the maritime equivalent of a death metal concert, loud, chaotic, and full of potential hazards. Despite the myths, Da Gama's passage around the Cape was anything but triumphant. It was more like a desperate scramble against Mother Nature's temper tantrum, with waves taller than the ships themselves and winds that threatened to send them back to Portugal faster than a disappointed parent after a bad report card. The journey around the Cape took them a grueling 4 months, 4 months that felt like a lifetime. Once through, the challenges didn't exactly call a truce. The Indian Ocean was a vast, uncharted expanse, and Gama's crew was navigating it with all the precision of a blindfolded archer. But here's where the economic stakes come into play. Reaching India wasn't just about glory, it was about cold, hard cash. The spice trade was a billion-dollar industry in today's terms, and Portugal had its eyes on the prize. Each setback was a reminder of the fortune that awaited them, a carrot dangling just out of reach. And speaking of setbacks, Gama's leadership was far from flawless. There were times when his decisions were questionable, to say the least. He was known for his harsh discipline, and while some might call it tough love, others might call it a fast track to a mutiny. It's one thing to be a stern leader, it's another to push your crew to the brink of rebellion. The myth paints Gama as a maritime genius, but the reality was that he was learning on the job, making mistakes as he went. As they pushed onward, the crew's discontent simmered just below the surface. They were a melting pot of ambition and desperation, driven by dreams of riches, but haunted by the ever-present threat of failure. The journey was a test of endurance, a battle against the elements, and a struggle with their own demons. The Cape of Good Hope might have been behind them, but the Indian Ocean held its own mysteries and dangers. Gama's voyage was a gamble, a high-stakes game where the odds were stacked against them. Yet, for all the hardships, it was a mission that would redefine their world. The seasickness, the scurvy, the storms, they were all part of the price to pay for a shot at glory and fortune. And while the legend of Vasco da Gama often glosses over these gritty details, the truth is that this was a journey of survival as much as it was of exploration. So, as they sailed further into the unknown, they were driven by a singular vision: to reach India, to make history, and to return with tales of adventure and pockets full of spices. Little did they know, the story was just beginning, and the real challenges were yet to come. And so, with the Indian Ocean behind them and the promise of fortune ahead, Vasco da Gama and his crew finally sighted India in May of 1498. To say they arrived with a bang would be giving them too much credit. Think more along the lines of a clumsy entrance at a fancy party where everyone turns to stare. Because what awaited them was a mix of fascination and confusion that could only happen when two worlds collide without Google Translate or a lonely planet guidebook. Gama and his crew docked at Calicut, a bustling port city on the southwest coast of India, known for its spice markets that made European merchants drool in their sleep. This was it, the fabled land of spices, the El Dorado of the East, where the air was thick with the scents of cardamom, cinnamon, and pepper. But before you imagine a smooth negotiation and a handshake deal, let's delve into the comedy of errors that ensued. The Zamorin of Calicut, the local ruler, was the kind of guy who had seen it all. He was a savvy operator, accustomed to dealing with Arab and Indian merchants who knew their cloves from their cumin. So when Gama showed up, all wide-eyed and eager, the Zamorin was both curious and skeptical. Enter the first cultural misunderstanding: Vasco's gift. Gama, in his infinite wisdom, brought with him a selection of presents that can only be described as a dollar store's clearance section. Picture this: a few strings of coral beads, some cheap cloth, and a handful of brass vessels. You can almost hear the collective eye roll from the Zamorin's court. This wasn't just a faux pas, it was a diplomatic facepalm. The Zamorin's response was polite but clear. Is this a joke? The Portuguese were expecting to wow the local ruler with their trinkets, but they might as well have been offering monopoly money. The gift exchange was just the beginning of a series of diplomatic blunders. Vasco, hoping to establish a trading post and secure a lucrative trade agreement, found that his negotiating tactics were about as effective as a chocolate teapot. The Portuguese had naively assumed that they could waltz in and dominate the trade scene, but the reality was starkly different. The existing trade networks were complex, well-established, and fiercely competitive. The Arab merchants in the region were seasoned veterans, and they weren't about to let some European upstarts muscle in on their turf. As Gama sat down for negotiations, he quickly realized he was out of his depth. The economic realities were harsh. The spices he coveted, black pepper, cardamom, nutmeg, were worth their weight in gold, and the locals knew it. The Portuguese had hoped to exchange goods at favorable rates, but they hadn't counted on the shrewdness of the Indian traders. Da Gama's vision of quickly establishing a profitable trade route was rapidly crumbling, like a sandcastle in a rising tide. And then there were the cultural nuances that Da Gama and his crew completely missed. For instance, the practice of haggling was an art form in these markets, a dance of offers and counter-offers that Da Gama approached with all the finesse of a bull in a china shop. His heavy-handed tactics were met with polite resistance, and at times, open mockery. The legend of Da Gama paints him as a shrewd negotiator, but in reality, he was a novice in a game that had been played for centuries. The economic implications of Da Gama's negotiations, or failures thereof, were significant. While Da Gama's arrival is often hailed as the dawn of European trade dominance in Asia, the truth is far less glamorous. Initially, the Portuguese struggled to gain a foothold. The existing Arab and Indian traders had no intention of rolling out the red carpet for these newcomers. The competition was fierce, and the Portuguese were seen as interlopers rather than partners. Yet, what Da Gama's voyage did achieve was to lay the groundwork for future expeditions. The Portuguese crown, undeterred by the initial setbacks, saw the potential for enormous profit. They were in it for the long haul, ready to invest in further voyages, armed with better knowledge and hopefully better gifts. The economic stakes were too high to ignore. Europe's appetite for spices was insatiable, and Portugal was determined to satisfy it. Da Gama's initial foray into Indian trade may have been riddled with mishaps, but it was the first step in a journey that would eventually lead to the establishment of a Portuguese presence in India. Future expeditions would learn from his mistakes, refining their approach, and eventually securing the trade routes that would make Portugal a powerhouse in the spice trade. As for Da Gama, while his first encounter with India might not have been the triumphant conquest he had envisioned, it was an invaluable learning experience. His journey was not just about finding a new route to the east. It was about understanding the complexities of global trade, the interplay of cultures, and the harsh realities of economics. In the grand tapestry of history, Vasco da Gama is often portrayed as a hero, a trailblazer who opened the doors to the East. But the truth is more nuanced. He was a man of his time, navigating uncharted waters in more ways than one. His voyage to India was as much about discovery as it was about confrontation between different worlds, different economies, and different ways of life. As Da Gama prepared to leave India, he carried with him not just spices, but a wealth of experience and knowledge that would shape the future of Portuguese exploration. The road to dominance in the spice trade was fraught with challenges, but for Portugal, it was a road worth taking. And so, with the winds of history at his back, Vasco da Gama set sail once more, leaving behind a legacy that was as complex as the man himself. What lay ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The world was forever changed. The spice trade was no longer just a dream, but a reality, albeit a harsh one, and Europe's eyes were firmly fixed on the East. The next chapters in this epic tale would bring new adventures, new challenges, and new players to the stage. But for now, the story of Vasco da Gama was far from over, with many more twists and turns to come. As Vasco da Gama set sail from India, the air was thick with the scent of spices and the weight of expectation. His return voyage was no leisurely cruise back to the comforts of home. It was a grueling marathon against time and tide. With holds brimming with the precious cargo of pepper and other spices, Da Gama was about to make a splash on the European stage that would be felt for centuries. But before we get to the hero's welcome and geopolitical game-changer that awaited, let's talk about the journey itself, because nothing about it was a walk in the park. The return trip to Portugal in 1499 was a brutal exercise in endurance, a test of human spirit against an ocean that had no intention of playing nice. If Da Gama had thought the outward journey was tough, he was now in for a masterclass in maritime misery. The sea was an unforgiving beast, and Da Gama's crew battled storms that could make even the hardiest sailor question his life choices. The return route was a calculated risk, retracing their path around the Cape of Good Hope, more aptly named the Cape of Hang On for Dear Life at this point. The fleet had dwindled by now, not just in spirit, but in numbers. Remember those 4 ships they started with? By the time they approached the Cape, only two were left, the São Gabriel and the Berrio. The São Rafael had been scuttled off the coast of East Africa to conserve resources. Meanwhile, the supply ship had long since been abandoned, probably left to float aimlessly like a forgotten shopping cart in a parking lot. And then there was the human toll. Out of the original 170 crew members, only about 55 souls would make it back to Portuguese shores. Scurvy, that ever-present menace, had claimed its share, turning men into shadows of their former selves. But hey, who needs a full crew when you've got the maritime equivalent of a lottery ticket in your cargo hold? The spices they carried were worth their weight in gold, literally. Pepper was the principal prize, and in Europe it was the culinary equivalent of a black Amex card. The return on investment was astronomical, and Gama knew it. This was the kind of haul that would make King Manuel I break out into a jig of pure, unadulterated glee. Arriving back in Lisbon in late summer of 1499, Gama was met with a hero's welcome that would put most rock stars to shame. Picture it: parades, accolades, and celebrations that lasted for days. Vasco da Gama was the toast of Portugal, the man who had done the impossible by opening a sea route to India. Forget the grueling months at sea and the skeletal crew. This was a time for pomp and circumstance, and Portugal was ready to party. But the real fireworks were happening behind the scenes, in the hallowed halls of power, where the implications of Da Gama's voyage were being weighed with all the gravitas of a council of war. The spice trade was no longer a distant dream, but a tangible reality, and Portugal was poised to seize the moment. The geopolitical landscape was shifting, and the stakes were high. Europe was on the brink of a new era, one where the East wasn't just a myth, but a very real source of wealth and power. Da Gama's voyage had done more than fill the coffers of the Portuguese crown. It had sent shockwaves through the established order of things. The Venetian monopoly on spices, long the bane of Western Europe, was under threat. No longer would the Venetians and their Arab intermediaries hold the keys to the Spice Kingdom. The direct sea route to India promised not just riches, but a strategic advantage that would redefine European geopolitics. Portugal had thrown down the gauntlet, and the other European powers were watching with bated breath. Yet, for all the fanfare and fortune, Da Gama's legacy was a mixed bag, a tapestry woven with threads of both triumph and tragedy. The opening of the sea route to India set off a chain reaction of events that were as dark as they were lucrative. European expansionism, fueled by dreams of empire and riches, would lead to centuries of conflict and exploitation. The Portuguese foothold in India would soon become a chokehold, as they established trading posts and fortresses, often by force, to dominate the spice trade. Contemporary critiques of this expansionism weren't hard to find, even in Da Gama's time. Portuguese chronicler Gaspar Correa, writing in the early 16th century, didn't shy away from noting the violence and coercion that accompanied the establishment of Portuguese power in the East. The spice trade wasn't just a commercial venture. It was a battleground where the rules of diplomacy and warfare were rewritten in blood and gold. The darker side of Da Gama's legacy is a testament to the complexities of human ambition. The initial voyage may have been a tale of daring exploration, but what followed was a saga of conquest and control. The Portuguese, like many European powers that followed, were driven by a mixture of curiosity, greed, and a sense of manifest destiny that often blinded them to the consequences of their actions. As for Da Gama, his personal legacy was equally complex. Lauded as a hero, he was also a man of his time, ruthless, ambitious, and willing to do whatever it took to achieve his goals. His methods were often brutal, as evidenced by his later voyages to India, where he employed tactics that would make a modern-day PR team sweat bullets. The legend of Da Gama as a trailblazing explorer is tempered by the reality of his role in laying the groundwork for Portugal's often harsh colonial policies. Yet, for better or worse, Vasco da Gama had set the stage for a new chapter in world history. His voyage was not just a singular achievement, but a catalyst that would influence the course of events for centuries. The spice route to India was open, and the world would never be the same. The story of Da Gama is a reminder that history is neither black nor white, but a kaleidoscope of human endeavors, each color as vivid and complex as the people who shape it. As Portugal basked in the glory of da Gama's success, the rest of Europe watched with a mix of envy and ambition. The race for the riches of the East was on, and the players were lining up for their turn. But that's a tale for another day, as the saga of exploration and empire continues to unfold. For now, we'll leave Vasco da Gama with his triumphs and trials, a man whose journey was far from over, and whose impact was just beginning to be felt on the world stage. So, with the spice-laden winds of change at his back, Vasco da Gama set the stage for the next act of his life, a sequel filled with more voyages, a few plot twists, and the inevitable curtain call. After basking in the accolades of his first triumph, da Gama wasn't content to rest on his laurels. No, this maritime maverick was ready to dive back into the unpredictable waters of exploration. In 1502, he embarked on his second voyage to India, this time with a fleet of 20 ships, a veritable armada compared to his first outing. The mission was clear: assert Portuguese dominance, and if necessary, do it with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Da Gama's approach during this expedition was a far cry from the diplomatic bumblings of his earlier visit. He was now a seasoned sailor with a reputation to uphold and a point to prove. The Portuguese crown had given him the green light to use force if negotiations didn't go his way. And let's just say, da Gama took that mandate and ran with it. His tactics were as aggressive as they were effective, leaving a trail of intimidation and coercion that would make even the most hardened pirates nod in approval. One of the more infamous episodes of this voyage was the incident with the Miri, a Muslim pilgrim ship. Da Gama captured the vessel, and after looting it, set it ablaze with hundreds of passengers still aboard. It was a brutal demonstration of power, a message that the Portuguese were not to be trifled with. This was not the da Gama of starry-eyed discovery. This was a man hardened by the realities of empire building, willing to enforce Portugal's interests with a ruthlessness that would echo through history. By the time da Gama returned to Portugal in 1503, he was not just a hero, but a living legend. King Manuel I saw him as a linchpin in the burgeoning Portuguese empire, showering him with titles and land. Da Gama was made the Count of Vidigueira, a noble rank that cemented his status in the annals of Portugal's aristocracy. But while life back home provided its comforts, the call of the sea was never far from his mind. Fast forward to 1524, and we find da Gama taking on one last voyage to India. This time, it was less about exploration and more about administration. He was appointed the Viceroy of Portuguese India, tasked with bringing order to a colonial enterprise that was teetering on chaos. Think of it as a retirement gig with a side of geopolitical chess, a role that required both his navigational skills and his knack for political maneuvering. Unfortunately, this final chapter in da Gama's storied career would be short-lived. Just months after arriving in India, he fell ill with malaria, a grim reminder that Mother Nature always gets the last laugh. On Christmas Eve of 1524, Vasco da Gama passed away in Cochin, a far cry from the triumphant homecomings of his earlier years. His body was initially buried in India, but it was later returned to Portugal, where he was laid to rest in the Geronimo's monastery in Lisbon, a fitting tribute to a man whose life was as turbulent as the seas he sailed. So, what are we to make of Vasco da Gama? On one hand, he was the quintessential trailblazer, a man whose voyages opened up new horizons for Europe and reshaped the global trade networks. The direct sea route to India was a game-changer, a commercial juggernaut that made Portugal a powerhouse in the spice trade. Economic impact was profound, with spices pouring into Europe, transforming culinary practices and fattening the coffers of Portuguese merchants. Yet, da Gama's legacy is a complex mosaic of triumph and terror. While his voyages expanded the map, they also paved the way for an era of colonial exploitation and violence. The romanticized tales of dashing explorers often gloss over the darker realities of conquest, the forced conversions, the cultural erasure, the human cost of empire building. Da Gama's story is a testament to the dual nature of exploration, the lure of discovery, and the shadow of domination. It's a narrative that captivates modern audiences not just because of its adventurous spirit, but because it mirrors the complexities of our own world. In an era grappling with the legacies of colonialism, da Gama's life serves as both a cautionary tale and a reminder of the relentless human drive to explore, to discover, and yes, to conquer. In the end, Vasco da Gama's voyages were more than just a series of maritime exploits. They were a turning point in history, a catalyst for change that rippled across continents and centuries. His story is a vivid illustration of the indomitable human spirit, the eternal quest for knowledge, and the often uncomfortable truths that lie beneath the surface of history's grand tapestry. As we close the book on Da Gama, let's remember that history is as much about the legends we create as it is about the realities we uncover, a journey of discovery that continues to this day. In the teeming, sweaty chaos of ancient Rome, where the air was thick with the scent of ambition and olive oil, Gaius Gracchus was born into a family that could rival any modern-day soap opera dynasty. The year was 154 BC, give or take a few months, because, let's face it, Romans weren't exactly wearing wristwatches, and the socio-political climate was about as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Gaius' father, Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus the Elder, was one of those Roman bigwigs who seemed to have a finger in every political pie. He'd been consul twice, which was kind of like being president, but with more toga parties and fewer debates on live television. Now, the Gracchi family wasn't just politically connected. They were practically the Kardashians of their time, minus the Instagram followers. Gaius' mother, Cornelia, was renowned for her intelligence and virtue, and she had a particular knack for turning her sons into political prodigies. She famously referred to her children as her jewels, which is a heartwarming sentiment until you remember that Roman jewels often ended up being pawned in the political arena. Gaius was the younger brother of Tiberius Gracchus, who set the family standard for political reform. And spoiler alert, for getting on the wrong side of the Senate. Tiberius had already stirred the pot with his land reform laws, trying to redistribute the wealth in Rome like it was a round of monopoly. He wanted to give land back to the common people, which sounds noble until you realize the Senate was less than thrilled to part with their sprawling estates. They were about as fond of Tiberius as a cat is of a bath, and things went south faster than you could say Senate veto. The political scene in Rome during Gaius' formative years was a breeding ground for discontent. The Senate, that august body of patrician power, was increasingly out of touch with the plebeians, who were tired of watching their livelihoods slip through their fingers like sand at Ostia Beach. The Roman economy was a mess of contradictions. Wealth was pouring in from foreign conquests, yet the average Roman farmer was struggling to keep a roof over their head. The rich were getting richer, and the poor were getting, well, poorer, and more than a little fed up. Gaius grew up in this pressure cooker of social tension, and it's fair to say he had a front-row seat to the political circus. Tiberius, his elder brother, was both a mentor and a cautionary tale. The elder Gracchus had been a trailblazer, but his trail led straight to a deadly confrontation with the Senate, proving that even in Rome, you could only push the establishment so far before they pushed back, literally, with clubs and stones. But let's not put the cart before the horse here. Young Gaius was still a lad, soaking up the lessons of Roman politics like a sponge in a wine vat. He was known for his sharp mind and sharper tongue, even as a youth, and it didn't take a soothsayer to predict he was destined for something big, or at least something headline-worthy. The public was growing increasingly disillusioned with the Senate, whose members seemed more interested in luxury villas and lavish banquets than in addressing the stark inequalities festering in Rome's underbelly. As Gaius matured, he watched as Rome's economic landscape shifted like the sands of the Sahara. The concentration of wealth in the hands of a few was as glaring as the midday sun, and with the rise of latifundia, vast estates worked by slaves, the small farmer was rapidly becoming an endangered species. This wasn't just a family dinner-table gripe. It was the kind of existential crisis that could topple empires. And Gaius, with the fire of his brother's legacy burning in his belly, was getting ready to step into the political arena with all the subtlety of a gladiator entering the Colosseum. Now, if you think political rivalries today are intense, consider the Roman Senate of Gaius' time. It was a viper's nest of intrigue, backstabbing, and occasionally actual stabbing. The aristocracy was fiercely protective of their privileges, and they saw reformers like the Gracchi brothers as nothing short of a threat to the Roman way of life, which, to be fair, involved a lot of lounging around in togas and debating the finer points of philosophy between sips of wine. Gaius' early experiences in this world were a masterclass in political survival. He learned that in Rome, you either played the game or got played, and he had no intention of being a Senate pawn. His brother Tiberius had already laid the groundwork for reform, but Gaius was determined to take it a step further. He was charismatic and ambitious, with a vision for Rome that was as radical as it was necessary. The public was increasingly on his side, fed up with a Senate that seemed more interested in feathering their own nests than in the welfare of the Roman people. But before Gaius could launch his own political career, he had to navigate the treacherous waters of Roman family dynamics. The Gracchi were a tight-knit bunch, but they were also fiercely competitive, and Gaius had to carve out his own niche in a family that was already steeped in political legacy. His mother, Cornelia, was a formidable influence, and she wasn't about to let her younger son rest on his laurels. She pushed Gaius to be more than just a shadow of his brother, to forge his own path and make his own mark on Roman history. It was against this backdrop of familial expectation and societal upheaval that Gaius Gracchus began to emerge as a political force in his own right. The stage was set for a career that would challenge the status quo and redefine what it meant to be a Roman statesman. Gaius was ready to step into the spotlight, armed with his family's legacy, a keen intellect, and a burning desire to see Rome become a city for all its citizens, not just the privileged few lounging on their marble terraces. The Roman Senate had no idea what was about to hit them. As the Roman Senate sat blissfully unaware, like a toga-clad deer in the headlights of oncoming reform, Gaius Gracchus was gearing up to redefine Roman politics. Fast forward to 123 BC, and our man Gaius has ascended to the role of tribune of the plebs, a position designed, at least in theory, to protect the interests of the common folk against the whims of the patrician elite. Of course, in practice, it was more like being the designated driver at a banquet where everyone else was drunk on power. Gaius wasn't content with merely filling his brother Tiberius' sandals. He was ready to kick them off and sprint toward reform like he was in the Olympic Games. His agenda was nothing short of ambitious, a political buffet that aimed to address Rome's glaring inequalities. First on the menu was his grain law, a masterstroke or a logistical nightmare, depending on who you asked. This law mandated that the state sell grain at a reduced price to Roman citizens. It was a populist move that aimed to win the hearts and stomachs of the plebeian masses, many of whom were struggling to afford their daily bread. Now, let's not mince words about the grain law's implementation. Imagine trying to organize a Black Friday sale without the internet. It involved warehouses, ledgers, and enough red tape to wrap a mummy. The grain law was designed to alleviate hunger, but ended up being more like a Roman version of Guess Who, where only the state knew the rules, and even then they weren't quite sure. But for Gaius, it was a political coup. He became the darling of the common people, even as the aristocracy rolled their eyes so hard you could hear it echo in the Senate chambers. Next on Gaius's checklist was military reform, another one of those areas where the ideal met the absurdity of Roman logistics. At this point, Rome's military recruitment was as exclusive as a country club, favoring land-owning citizens who could afford their own armor. Gaius saw the flaw in this system. What's the point of having a massive empire if you can't even draft enough soldiers to defend it? His reform lowered the property requirement for soldiers, opening the ranks to the capite censi, the head count. These were Rome's poorest citizens, who had little more than their heads to contribute to the state, hence the catchy name. This reform was a game-changer, both for Rome's military strength and for Gaius's popularity. It was akin to opening the doors to a VIP party, only to find out that the new guests were exactly the fresh energy and enthusiasm the bash needed. Of course, the patricians were less than thrilled. They saw this as diluting the military with the masses, and they weren't exactly wrong. But in the grand chess game of Roman politics, Gaius was several moves ahead, winning the loyalty of the soldiers who would become essential to any political power play. Gaius didn't stop there. He had plans to shake up the judiciary too. His judicial reforms aimed to curb the rampant corruption in the courts, which were about as impartial as a referee with a favorite team. The courts were dominated by senators, who had a habit of ruling in their own favor, a sort of ancient version of grading your own exam. Gaius proposed to include the equites, the Roman knight class, in the judiciary. This was the Roman middle class, wealthy but not aristocratic, and bringing them into the judicial fold was like adding a surprise twist to a predictable plot. These reforms were a triple threat. They aimed to tackle economic disparity, military inefficiency, and judicial corruption. But they also served Gaius's political strategy, garnering him support from not just the plebs, but also the equites who were eager to have a bigger slice of the political pie. It was a balancing act worthy of a high-wire performer, and Gaius had the crowd on the edge of their seats. Of course, no good deed goes unpunished, especially in the Roman Senate. The reactions from the senatorial elite were less than enthusiastic, resembling a herd of disgruntled cats being herded into a bath. They saw Gaius as a threat to their age-old privileges, their grip on power slipping like sand through their manicured fingers. In their eyes, Gaius wasn't a reformer. He was a rabble-rouser, an agitator of the status quo. Yet, despite the Senate's grumblings, Gaius's popularity soared. He was a political rock star, drawing crowds like a gladiator match on a Saturday night. But with great power came even greater enemies, and Gaius knew he was walking a tightrope over a pit of political vipers. As he continued to push for reform, the tension in Rome was palpable, a powder keg waiting for a spark. And so, the stage was set for the next act in Gaius's political saga. The Senate was plodding, the people were rallying, and Gaius, ever the strategist, was preparing his next move. Stay tuned, because in this Roman drama, the stakes were only getting higher, and the curtain was far from closing. As the Senate sat plodding like cats, with a particularly juicy mouse in their sights, Gaius Gracchus was making waves, and not the gentle kind that lap at the shores of the Tiber. His reforms were shaking the foundations of Roman society, and for the elite, that was about as welcome as a toga malfunction at a triumphal procession. The Senate, unsurprisingly, wasn't about to let Gaius's populist agenda go unchallenged. They were like a group of ancient spin doctors, spinning plots faster than a potter's wheel. Their strategy, divide and conquer, a tactic as old as politics itself, and as effective as ever. Enter Marcus Livius Drusus, a man whose name sounds like a sneeze and whose political maneuvers were equally sudden. Drusus was the Senate's Trojan horse, a tribune handpicked to outmaneuver Gaius at his own game. His mission was to propose reforms that were even more radical than those of Gaius, but with a twist. They were designed never to be implemented. Think of it as the ancient Roman equivalent of promising free pizza for life, knowing full well the ovens would never be fired up. Drusus suggested colonies in Italy and a land distribution plan that would make Gaius's proposals look like a backyard barbecue. The plebs were intrigued, their attention diverted like a dog chasing a squirrel. It's easy to see why the Senate's plan was diabolically clever. They offered the moon, knowing that when the time came to deliver, they would be nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, Gaius was left scrambling, his support base as shaky as a Roman chariot on a cobblestone road. It was classic political sabotage, and it worked like a charm. But the Senate wasn't content to stop there. They went for the jugular with the creation of the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, or the final decree. Think of it as the Roman version of a government shutdown, but with more swords and fewer Twitter rants. This decree was the Senate's ultimate weapon, granting them the power to protect the state by any means necessary, which was a nice way of saying they could bypass legal norms and take drastic action. It was as if they'd found a loophole in the political rulebook, and they were ready to exploit it. Now, let's not pretend the final decree was a masterstroke of legal innovation. It was more like a legal sledgehammer, and its first victim was Gaius Gracchus. The political chaos that ensued was as predictable as a toga party getting out of hand. Rome was thrown into turmoil, with factions forming faster than you could say bread and circuses. Gaius, for all his political savvy, was caught in a maelstrom. The Senate's moves were underhanded, sure, but they were also effective. They painted Gaius as a threat to the Roman way of life, a demagogue whose reforms would lead to chaos. It was a narrative that resonated with those who had much to lose, mainly the senators with vested interests in maintaining the status quo. The chaos reached a crescendo in 121 BC, a year that would go down in history for its political violence. Rome became a city divided, with clashes breaking out between supporters of Gaius and those aligned with the Senate. It was like a street brawl on an imperial scale, with both sides unwilling to back down. The final decree had given the Senate carte blanche to act, and they did so with brutal efficiency. Gaius, outmaneuvered and outgunned, found himself cornered. His supporters dwindled, and the Senate's forces closed in. It was a tragic end to a promising career, one that had begun with such hope and ambition. But in the cutthroat world of Roman politics, idealism was often a liability, not an asset. The aftermath of Gaius's downfall was a sobering reminder of the Senate's power. They had not only neutralized a political threat, but had also sent a clear message. Reformers would not be tolerated if they threatened the entrenched interests of the elite. The final decree, for all its questionable legality, had served its purpose. It was a tool of political repression, a blunt instrument wielded with deadly precision. Despite his defeat, Gaius's legacy endured. His reforms, though ultimately undone, highlighted the deep-seated inequalities within Roman society. The Senate may have won the battle, but the war for Rome's soul was far from over. The plebs, emboldened by Gaius's vision, would continue to push for change, and the political landscape of Rome would never be quite the same. In the end, Gaius Gracchus was more than just a footnote in history. He was a symbol of resistance, a reminder that even the mightiest empires are vulnerable to the power of ideas. His story is a testament to the enduring struggle between progress and tradition, a battle that continues to play out in political arenas around the world. So, as we leave Gaius on the stage of history, battered but unbowed, remember this. In the theater of politics, the actors may change, but the drama remains the same. And with that, we prepare to turn the page to the next chapter in this epic saga of ambition, betrayal, and the never-ending quest for power in ancient Rome. Stay tuned, because the curtain has yet to fall on this gripping tale. So, here we are, smack dab in the thick of Rome's political whirlwind, and Gaius Gracchus is finding himself in deeper than a centurion in quicksand. He's been playing a high-stakes game of political chess with the Roman Senate, and let's just say, the Senate's got a secret stash of queens up their sleeves, or togas, as it were. Now, Gaius, ever the political maverick, has been riding high on a wave of populist support. But the tide was about to turn, and not in the way you might turn a toga during a toga party. His bid for re-election as tribune was about as successful as trying to sell sand in the Sahara. The year was 121 BC, and the political climate in Rome was more volatile than a crate of amphorae on a rickety cart. The Senate, having had just about enough of Gaius's reformist shenanigans, decided it was high time to rain on his parade. Enter stage right, Lucius Arpimius, the Senate's not-so-secret weapon. Arpimius was a man with ambitions as towering as the Capitoline Hill itself, and a willingness to do whatever it took to secure his place in the annals of Roman history, though perhaps not in the most flattering chapter. He was the one-man band the Senate needed to orchestrate the downfall of Gaius Gracchus, and he played his role with the enthusiasm of a gladiator eyeing an easy victory. The tension in Rome had been simmering for some time, but it was about to boil over like an unattended pot of garum. Gaius was increasingly seen as a radical, a man whose reforms threatened the delicate balance of Roman society, or at least the delicate balance of the senatorial bank accounts. The Senate pulled out all the stops to prevent his re-election, employing tactics that ranged from the sneaky to the downright scandalous. It was a political backstab-a-thon, with Gaius as the hapless pincushion. And then came the infamous Battle of the Aventine Hill, a name that conjures images of epic Roman warfare, but was, in reality, a tragicomedy of errors. Picture this. Gaius, cornered and out of options, retreats to the Aventine Hill with his supporters. It was less a strategic military maneuver and more a last-ditch stand, like trying to stop a runaway chariot with nothing but good intentions and a fig leaf for armor. The Senate, of course, saw this as their cue to pounce, and they sent Arpimius with an armed force to quell the uprising. It was less a battle and more a massacre, with Gaius's supporters quickly outnumbered and outmatched. The Aventine Hill, once a symbol of hope for reform, became a grim reminder of the Senate's iron grip on power. Gaius, in a last act of defiance, or perhaps desperation, took his own life rather than be captured. It was a tragic end for a man who had dared to dream of a different Rome. But let's not romanticize the grim reality. This wasn't some heroic last stand. It was a political demolition derby, with Gaius as the unfortunate crash test dummy. The Senate's final showdown with Gaius was less about the clash of ideologies and more about the cold, hard calculus of power. And in this arena, Gaius was outgunned and outmaneuvered. Lucius Arpimius, for his part, was hailed as a hero by the Senate, who were probably popping open the ancient equivalent of champagne, perhaps a nice Falonian wine, as they toasted to their victory. The Senate had not only eliminated a political rival, but had also sent a clear message to any would-be reformers: challenge the status quo at your peril. It was a masterclass in political repression, and the Senate played their hand with ruthless efficiency. The aftermath of the Battle of the Aventine Hill was as predictable as a Roman tragedy. Gaius's body was unceremoniously tossed into the Tiber, a fate reserved for traitors and criminals, not reformers with a vision for a better Rome. It was a symbolic act, a way for the Senate to wash their hands of the whole messy affair, much like Pontius Pilate would do a couple of centuries later. Yet, despite their best efforts, the Senate couldn't wash away Gaius's legacy. His reforms, though undone, had planted the seeds of change in the Roman psyche. The plebeians, emboldened by his vision, would continue to push for reform, even as the Senate clung to their privileges with all the tenacity of a lion guarding its prey. In the end, Gaius Gracchus was more than just a footnote in history. He was a catalyst for change, a man whose ideas would echo through the annals of time. His downfall was a stark reminder of the perils of political ambition in a world where power was the ultimate currency. But his legacy, like the eternal city itself, would endure, a testament to the enduring struggle between progress and tradition. As we leave Gaius behind, a fallen star in the firmament of Roman history, we turn our gaze to the future, where the ripples of his reforms would continue to shape the course of the Roman Republic. Because in the epic theatre of history, the curtain never truly falls, and the drama, much like Rome, is eternal. With Gaius Gracchus, now a spectral figure in Rome's historical tapestry, it's time to sift through the aftermath of his political drama and examine the legacy he left behind. Spoiler alert, it's a mixed bag of romantic myths and grim realities, much like a Roman feast where the bread is stale but the wine is divine. Let's start by addressing the elephant in the Roman Forum. Gaius's reforms might have been as short-lived as a Roman holiday, but their impact was anything but ephemeral. They sparked a conversation, probably more of a shouting match, about wealth distribution, military service, and judicial fairness that would echo through the centuries. His grain law, for one, planted the seeds for state intervention in food supply, a concept so radical it was like serving tofu at a gladiatorial feast. And while it didn't solve Rome's hunger issues overnight, because, frankly, it was more of a logistical nightmare than a solution, it set a precedent for future leaders to ponder over their morning mulsum. Economically, Gaius's reforms were a shot in the dark aimed at a bullseye. They highlighted the chasm between Rome's haves and have-nots, but they also underscored the complexity of redistributing wealth in a society where the rich were about as keen on sharing as a cat with a ball of yarn. Yet, his efforts to include the equites in the judiciary were a masterstroke. It was like adding a fresh ingredient to a stale recipe, and while the taste didn't suit everyone, it signaled a shift towards a more inclusive political arena. Now, let's talk military reforms. By lowering the property requirements for soldiers, Gaius widened the recruitment net, creating a more diverse army. This was like inviting the whole neighborhood to a toga party, only to find out they brought not just wine, but enthusiasm too. It democratized military service, and in doing so, laid the groundwork for future Roman armies that would conquer vast swaths of the known world. Not bad for a reform that initially seemed as shaky as a Roman aqueduct in an earthquake. But beyond the concrete consequences, let's delve into the legend of Gaius Gracchus, a story that's been polished and buffed until it shines like a Roman marble statue. The romantic narrative casts him as a martyr for the common people, a tragic hero whose ideals were too pure for the cynical world of Roman politics. It's a tale that resonates with the timeless allure of the underdog, the man who dared to challenge the system. Yet, the truth is a little less glamorous. Gaius was, at times, as much a political opportunist as he was a reformer. He played the political game as deftly as anyone, using public sentiment to bolster his position. In reality, his story is less about a lone hero battling the forces of evil and more about a savvy politician navigating the treacherous waters of Roman politics, often with the finesse of a bull in a vineyard. So, what's the takeaway from Gaius's saga? For starters, it's a reminder that political reform is a marathon, not a sprint. Gaius's initiatives may have been quashed, but they lit the fuse for future generations to continue the pursuit of justice and equality. His story is a testament to the cyclical nature of history, the push and pull between progress and tradition, innovation and inertia. It's an age-old dance that plays out in every society, from the Roman Forum to modern city halls. And speaking of modern times, isn't it striking how Gaius's tale mirrors today's political landscape? Swap the togas for suits and the Senate for Congress, and you've got a storyline that's eerily familiar. The struggle between entrenched interests and reformers, the clash of ideals and realities, the ever-present challenge of balancing populism with pragmatism. These are themes as relevant now as they were in 121 BC. Gaius's story serves as a cautionary tale and a source of inspiration, a reminder that while the players may change, the game remains much the same. As we draw the curtain on Gaius, Gracchus's political theatre, let's not forget the lessons his life imparts. He was a man who dared to dream big in a world that preferred small, safe steps. His reforms, though ultimately undone, were like pebbles cast into the vast ocean of Roman politics, creating ripples that would shape the tides of history long after his untimely demise. And that, my friends, is the true legacy of Gaius Gracchus, a testament to the power of ideas, the endurance of hope, and the unending quest for a better, fairer world. So next time you're caught in the whirlwind of modern political drama, raise a glass of your finest vintage in honor of Gaius, because in the end, his story is as eternal as Rome itself. If you ever need proof that towering over your peers isn't just about physical height, let me introduce you to a young Charles de Gaulle. Born in the city of Lille in 1890, this Frenchman came out of the womb with a military pedigree sharper than a bayonet. His father, Henry de Gaulle, was a professor with a passion for history and philosophy. No pressure, right? Growing up in a family where discussions likely revolved around military strategy and existentialism over breakfast made Charles the man he was destined to be. By the time he reached the ripe old age of 19, de Gaulle had stepped into the hallowed halls of the Saint Cyr Military Academy. Think of it as the French version of West Point, but with more croissants and less football. Saint Cyr was the elite of the elite, where future generals rubbed shoulders, and egos were as large as the artillery they'd eventually command. De Gaulle fit right in, though he had a tendency to quite literally stand out. At 6'5", he was as conspicuous as a baguette in a field of croissants. His height wasn't the only thing that set him apart. De Gaulle had a knack for saying exactly what he thought, regardless of who was listening. This was a man who once remarked, "France cannot be France without greatness." Modesty wasn't exactly his forte, but let's give credit where it's due. He had a point, and he lived his life as if he was the personification of that greatness. Now, fast forward a bit to World War I, the war that was supposed to end all wars, but was more like the opening act of a particularly grim trilogy. De Gaulle, now a second lieutenant, was thrown into the thick of it. He served with the 33rd Infantry Regiment and found himself on the front lines, where the mud was thick and the trenches were deeper than a teenager's angst. During the Battle of Verdun in 1916, an event so bloody and brutal it became synonymous with the very idea of hell on earth, de Gaulle was wounded and captured by the Germans. His capture was not for lack of trying to avoid it. He was a tough nut to crack. While his fellow soldiers were probably thinking about survival, de Gaulle was thinking about escape. He attempted it not once, not twice, but 5 times. This was a man who refused to accept captivity as his fate. Each escape attempt was thwarted, and each time he was caught, de Gaulle would be thrown back into the confines of a prisoner camp. But even behind barbed wire, his mind was free, and his spirit unbroken. He would let her write, "Nothing lasts except the temporary." A fitting motto for a man who refused to let a little thing like imprisonment stop him. Despite the setbacks, his time as a POW provided him with a unique perspective. He observed the German military up close, analyzing their tactics and strategies with a kind of fervor most people reserve for binge-watching their favorite TV series. This would pay off in spades later on, but we'll get to that in due time. De Gaulle's early life and wartime experiences were more than just a series of unfortunate events. They were the crucible that forged his indomitable will. He emerged from World War I not just as a soldier, but as a thinker, a strategist, and a leader in the making. He had tasted defeat, but he had also learned resilience. He had been captured, but his mind had roamed free, absorbing all that he could. So there you have it, Charles de Gaulle, the towering figure with an even taller ambition who had seen the worst of human conflict and came out of it with a spirit that wouldn't quit. And just like that, the stage was set for him to become the leader we all know today. But don't worry, there's more to come. We've only scratched the surface of de Gaulle's story, a tale as grand and complex as the man himself. As the dust of World War I settled, Charles de Gaulle was left standing as a man honed by conflict, but the world was hardly done throwing challenges his way. Fast forward to 1940, and Europe was once again in the grip of chaos. France, the proud nation of liberty, equality, and fraternity, found itself in dire straits as German forces blitzed through the Ardennes faster than you can say Maginot Line. De Gaulle, still a relatively unknown figure, was a brigadier general in the French army. But let's not downplay his obscurity. He was the kind of unknown that would make a wallflower at a prom seem like a social butterfly. When France fell to the Nazis in June 1940, the government in Paris decided surrender was a viable option. De Gaulle, however, had other ideas. Surrender wasn't in his vocabulary, much like the word subtle. He took one look at the crumbling French defenses and decided it was time to make an exit, stage right. De Gaulle, who had a knack for dramatic flair, flew to London. No easy feat considering the Luftwaffe was treating the French skies like their personal playground. Landing in Britain, de Gaulle was not exactly welcomed as the savior of France. More like an unexpected houseguest who refuses to leave. But with the kind of audacity that would make even the most seasoned poker player blush, he took to the airwaves on the BBC. On June 18, 1940, he delivered a speech that was less keep calm and carry on, and more get up and fight back. The appeal of 18 June, as it became known, was a rallying cry to the French people, urging them not to lose hope and to resist Nazi occupation. It was a call to arms that transformed de Gaulle from a little-known military officer to the leader of Free France, a government in exile opposed to the Vichy regime. This speech was a game-changer. It was like the viral tweet of its day, reaching ears across occupied Europe. De Gaulle, with his booming voice and steely resolve, became a symbol of defiance, a lighthouse in a stormy sea. But let's be honest, rallying a nation scattered and demoralized wasn't all stirring speeches and patriotic fervor. It was also about political maneuvering and the relentless effort to be taken seriously on the international stage. Enter Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister with a penchant for cigars and a vocabulary as rich as the British Museum. Churchill and de Gaulle's relationship was the stuff of legends, or perhaps sitcoms. Churchill famously described de Gaulle as the greatest cross I have to bear, a testament to their prickly partnership. The two men were united by their desire to defeat Hitler, but often found themselves at odds. De Gaulle's unwavering independence clashed with Churchill's strategic pragmatism. It was like watching two alpha dogs in a room full of chew toys, lots of growling, but ultimately they were on the same team. Then there was Franklin D. Roosevelt, the American president who viewed de Gaulle with a mix of suspicion and irritation. To Roosevelt, de Gaulle was that one guy at the party who insists on telling everyone how the music should be played, despite not being the host. Roosevelt preferred to deal with the Vichy regime, hoping to keep the peace with the French colonies in North Africa. De Gaulle, however, saw Vichy as collaborators with the Nazis, and he wasn't about to play nice. With Churchill and Roosevelt, de Gaulle walked a tightrope between diplomacy and his unyielding vision for France. He was the embodiment of the phrase, my way or the highway, and while this earned him respect for his sheer tenacity, it also made him a bit of a diplomatic headache. But here's the thing about de Gaulle. He didn't care. His focus was singular, a free and independent France. While the Allies plotted D-Day, de Gaulle was busy building up the Free French forces, rallying soldiers and supporters from all corners of the globe. By 1944, he commanded over 300,000 troops, a testament to his ability to inspire and lead. When the Allies finally landed on the beaches of Normandy, de Gaulle was ready. He wasn't just a spectator in the liberation of France. He was a key player, ensuring that Free French forces were front and center in the march to Paris. As the Allies pushed forward, de Gaulle made his way back to France, entering Paris on August 25, 1944. The city was liberated, and de Gaulle marched down the Champs-Élysées in a victory parade that was as much about symbolism as it was about triumph. His presence was a message to the world. France was back, and it was de Gaulle who had led the charge. But let's not romanticize this too much. De Gaulle's return wasn't just a heroic homecoming. It was a strategic power play. He wanted to ensure that France was recognized as a major power in the post-war order, not just a country to be rebuilt by the victors. He had his eye on the future, knowing that the real work was just beginning. So there you have it. Charles de Gaulle, the self-assured general who refused to let France fade into the annals of history. He was a complex figure, a man of contradictions who could be both inspiring and infuriating. His story during World War II is one of resilience and resolve, a testament to the power of conviction in the face of overwhelming odds. And yet, as the war waned and peace loomed on the horizon, de Gaulle's challenges were far from over. The stage was set for the next act in his remarkable journey, but that's a tale for another time. Stay tuned, because the story of Charles de Gaulle is just getting started. As the dust settled on a war-torn Europe, Charles de Gaulle found himself at the helm of a nation eager to rise from the ashes, much like a phoenix with a penchant for fine wine and existential philosophy. Officially stepping into the role of head of the provisional government in 1944, de Gaulle was tasked with the Herculean endeavor of rebuilding France, a country left battered not just by bombs, but by years of occupation and collaboration. If ever there was a time for a leader with vision and stubborn determination, this was it. De Gaulle, never one to shy away from a challenge, approached the reconstruction with the zeal of a man who had just survived a 5-year game of political chess. But this wasn't just about patching up potholes and fixing broken windows. France was in the throes of economic turbulence, with inflation soaring like a hot air balloon in a hurricane. The French franc was wobblier than a Parisian mime on roller skates, and de Gaulle knew that stabilizing the currency was crucial. Enter the Monet Plan, an ambitious blueprint for economic modernization aimed at boosting productivity by about 25% within 5 years. Spoiler alert, they didn't quite hit that target, but hey, dream big or go home, right? The political landscape was no less treacherous. France was a patchwork quilt of ideologies, from communists to conservatives, each with their own ideas on how to rebuild. De Gaulle, ever the pragmatic visionary, aimed to unify these disparate threads into a tapestry of national cohesion. Yet his style of governance, let's call it my way or the highway, didn't always mesh well with democratic sensibilities. De Gaulle's penchant for centralized power was like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. It looked impressive, but wasn't exactly practical. His stubbornness, though sometimes endearing, often clashed with the realities of a fledgling democracy. De Gaulle had a habit of making decisions as if he were still commanding a military unit, where dissent wasn't exactly encouraged. For instance, his insistence on a strong executive clashed with the more parliamentary inclinations of other French leaders. This tension was as palpable as a mime's invisible wall, leading to frequent political skirmishes. De Gaulle's approach could be humorously summed up by the adage, if at first you don't succeed, redefine success. He had a knack for bulldozing through opposition with a mix of charm and sheer tenacity. Yet, for all his charisma, de Gaulle's leadership style often left his colleagues feeling as if they'd been run over by a rhetorical tank. A highlight, or lowlight, depending on whom you ask, of his tenure was the 1946 constitutional crisis. De Gaulle's vision of a strong presidential system was met with resistance from those who favored a parliamentary model. The resulting stalemate was akin to a high-stakes game of chicken, with de Gaulle ultimately deciding he'd rather exit the vehicle than participate in a system he saw as flawed. In January 1946, he resigned, leaving the political scene with the dramatic flair of a stage actor bowing out after a particularly intense soliloquy. De Gaulle's post-resignation period was less a retreat and more a strategic withdrawal. He retired to Carla Milestu Iglesias, a name that rolls off the tongue like a sonorous French ballad, where he penned his war memoirs. This wasn't just a retirement hobby. It was de Gaulle's way of cementing his legacy, crafting a narrative that was part history, part myth, and wholly de Gaulle. His writing was a blend of reflection and anticipation, as if he were both reminiscing about past triumphs and mapping out future conquests. While the political scene continued without him, de Gaulle bided his time, like a chess player watching the board, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His patience was remarkable, almost as if he'd taken a vow of silence, an ironic twist for a man whose words had once rallied a nation. But beneath the calm exterior was the simmering certainty that France would call him back when the time was right. In the interim, France stumbled through political instability like a tipsy tourist navigating cobblestone streets. Governments rose and fell with alarming regularity, proving that while de Gaulle may have been a difficult leader, he was at least a consistent one. The post-war years were marked by coalition governments that were about as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. It was clear that France needed a steady hand at the wheel, and many began to realize that de Gaulle's unyielding vision might be just what the doctor ordered. Yet, in this period of political musical chairs, de Gaulle remained an enigmatic figure, hovering on the periphery of power, biding his time. His absence was palpable, like the missing piece of a puzzle. The French people, for all their initial resistance to his methods, began to see the appeal of his singular focus and unshakable resolve. It was a classic case of you don't know what you've got till it's gone. As the 1940s drew to a close, the stage was set for de Gaulle's eventual return. But that's a story for another time, filled with twists and turns worthy of a historical thriller. For now, we leave Charles de Gaulle in his self-imposed exile, a giant of a man waiting for the call that would bring him back to center stage. The story of Charles de Gaulle is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be just as riveting as the last. Stay tuned, because the saga of de Gaulle is a tale that refuses to fade quietly into the annals of history. With Charles de Gaulle biding his time in Carla Milestu Iglesias, the political scene in France spun like a carousel of chaos. With leadership changes so frequent, Parisians might as well have installed a revolving door at the Élysée Palace. Yet, as the 1950s wore on, the French government grappled with a thorny issue that was far from home, but close to the heart: Algeria. This North African colony wasn't just making waves. It was a full-blown tempest threatening to capsize the French ship of state. The Algerian War of Independence was like a grenade tossed into the polite parlor of French politics. It exploded onto the scene in 1954 and promised no easy cleanup. By 1958, France was knee-deep in a conflict that was draining resources and morale faster than you can say, "Vive la France." The government in Paris struggled to maintain control, and the French Fourth Republic was teetering like a café chair with one leg shorter than the others. Enter Charles de Gaulle, the man who seemed to have been cast as France's perpetual savior. With political instability reaching fever pitch, de Gaulle was the obvious candidate to return from his self-imposed exile and calm the stormy seas. It was like the country had collectively decided, when in doubt, call Charles. And so, in May 1958, de Gaulle made his grand re-entrance, with all the subtlety of a fireworks display on Bastille Day. De Gaulle's return wasn't just a comeback. It was practically a coup, though a bloodless one. The French Fourth Republic was on its last legs, and de Gaulle, with his towering presence and even taller ambitions, swept back into power with a mandate to fix the unfixable. He promised to resolve the Algerian crisis, and more importantly, to overhaul France's shaky political system. Now, if you thought de Gaulle would tiptoe back into power, think again. True to form, he took the reins with a vigor that left no doubt who was in charge. His first move was to craft a new constitution, one that would finally put the Fourth Republic out of its misery and usher in the Fifth Republic. It was like giving the French political machine a complete engine overhaul. The new constitution, adopted in October 1958, was designed with de Gaulle's favorite theme in mind: strong presidential authority. If France was going to be governed effectively, it needed a leader who could act decisively. No more coalition governments collapsing like soufflés. The Fifth Republic gave the president significant powers, creating a system that was part republic, part de Gaulle's personal fiefdom. De Gaulle's reforms didn't stop at political restructuring. He was determined to drag France into the modern era, economically and militarily. The Monet Plan of the 1940 had been an ambitious blueprint, but now it was time for a new wave of economic modernization. De Gaulle's policies focused on industrialization, infrastructure development, and boosting France's technological capabilities. The aim, to transform France into a European powerhouse, capable of standing shoulder to shoulder with the giants of the world. Speaking of giants, de Gaulle had a particular interest in making sure France wasn't overshadowed by the Cold War superpowers. Enter the force de frappe, France's independent nuclear arsenal. Because nothing says we're a serious global player, quite like having your own set of nukes. By 1960, France had successfully tested its first atomic bomb in the Algerian Sahara, making it the fourth nuclear power in the world. It was a move that gave de Gaulle the geopolitical leverage he craved. And let's be honest, it was a lot harder to boss around a country with nuclear capabilities. De Gaulle's adept handling of international affairs was as much about showmanship as it was about strategy. He had a flair for the dramatic and a penchant for making bold statements, like when he famously withdrew France from NATO Integrated Military Command in 1966. To de Gaulle, France was nobody's sidekick, and he wasn't about to let it play second fiddle to the US or anyone else. His vision of France was one of independence and grandeur, even if it meant ruffling a few feathers along the way. Yet, for all his international posturing, de Gaulle wasn't immune to the domestic challenges brewing under his nose. By the late 1960s, France was a powder keg of social unrest, and it didn't take long for the sparks to fly. The student protests of 1968 began as a movement against the rigid and outdated education system, but quickly spiraled into a broader critique of de Gaulle's authoritarian style and the capitalist system at large. May 1968 saw Paris transformed into a battleground of ideas, with students and workers joining forces in a massive wave of strikes and demonstrations. The streets echoed with chants for change, and the air was thick with tear gas and revolutionary fervor. It was a moment when France flirted with the precipice of yet another political upheaval. De Gaulle's response to the crisis was a masterclass in strategic retreat and counterattack. He temporarily fled to Germany to meet with military commanders, ensuring he had the army's backing before returning to Paris to address the nation. In a televised speech, he dissolved the National Assembly and called for new elections, effectively seizing back control of the narrative. The elections in June 1968 resulted in a landslide victory for de Gaulle's party, the Union for the Defense of the Republic. It was a testament to his ability to rally support, even in the face of widespread dissent. Yet the events of May 68 left an indelible mark on France and de Gaulle himself, highlighting the generational and ideological divides that simmered beneath the surface of French society. In the grand tapestry of Charles de Gaulle's leadership, his return to power in 1958 and the subsequent decade were a blend of triumphs and trials. His reforms reshaped France politically and economically, yet his tenure was punctuated by moments of tension both at home and abroad. De Gaulle's legacy is one of a complex leader who embodied both the grandeur and the contradictions of his nation. As we look ahead to the final act of de Gaulle's story, the questions linger. How would his tenure conclude, and what lasting impact would his leadership have on France and the world? Stay tuned, because the saga of Charles de Gaulle is not quite ready to take its final bow. As we turn the page to 1969, it's clear that Charles de Gaulle's decade-long tenure as the President of the Fifth Republic had been nothing short of a roller coaster ride, a mix of bold reforms, geopolitical chess, and domestic unrest that would give even the most seasoned political analyst whiplash. But alas, every great drama must have its denouement, and for de Gaulle, this came with a plot twist worthy of a political thriller. The stage was set with a nationwide referendum on regional reform and Senate restructuring in April 1969. De Gaulle, in his typical high-stakes style, tied his fate to the outcome. His proposal aimed at decentralizing power, a curious move for someone whose career was built on central authority and modernizing the French Senate. But the French public, perhaps weary of his towering presence, voted against it. With a 52.4% non-vote, the French effectively handed de Gaulle his walking papers. It was as if the nation collectively shrugged and said, "Merci, but non merci." True to his word, de Gaulle did what many thought unthinkable. He resigned. On April 28, 1969, he stepped down from the presidency, leaving behind a political landscape he had dominated for over a decade. It was a move as dramatic as any of his famous speeches, underlined with the kind of stoic resignation that could rival a Greek tragedy. De Gaulle's departure from the Élysée Palace was akin to watching a seasoned actor exit the stage, leaving the audience to ponder the echoes of his performance. In the wake of his resignation, de Gaulle retreated to Cala-les-Églises, his rural sanctuary that had served as a backdrop for both contemplation and strategic plotting. It was here that he turned his attention to writing his memoirs, a project he ambitiously claimed would change the world. For de Gaulle, writing wasn't just about recounting history. It was about shaping it. His memoirs, Mémoires d'Espoir, Memoirs of Hope, published posthumously, were a blend of autobiography and manifesto, rife with the kind of lofty rhetoric that only de Gaulle could deliver with a straight face. But let's not get carried away with romantic notions of a retired statesman. De Gaulle's writing process was about as serene as a Parisian traffic jam. He approached his memoirs with the same meticulous intensity he'd once reserved for military strategy, poring over drafts with the fervor of a general planning his next campaign. His ambition was palpable, though whether these writings truly changed the world remains up for debate. What they did accomplish was painting a portrait of de Gaulle as both a visionary and an iconoclast, a man who, for better or worse, refused to conform to anyone's expectations but his own. As de Gaulle penned his reflections, France continued to grapple with the legacy he left behind. His vision of a strong, independent France had indeed come to fruition, but it wasn't without its contradictions. The Fifth Republic, with its emphasis on presidential power, bore de Gaulle's unmistakable fingerprints, and yet it was a system that future leaders would both praise and criticize. The force de frappe remained a testament to his insistence on French sovereignty, but it also highlighted the precarious balance of power during the Cold War. Though de Gaulle was no longer at the helm, his presence loomed large over French politics. His successors inherited both the fruits and the follies of his leadership. The economic modernization he championed propelled France into prosperity, yet the social tensions of the 60s remained unresolved, simmering beneath the surface like a dormant volcano. His foreign policy, characterized by a stubborn refusal to play second fiddle to anyone, left France with a unique position on the global stage, one of independence, but also isolation. De Gaulle's legacy, much like the man himself, defies simple categorization. He was a leader who embodied the grandeur and contradictions of France, a nation both proud and perplexed by its own identity. His indelible mark on history is a testament to the power of conviction, even in the face of adversity. Yet, it's also a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked ambition, the kind that can lead even the most steadfast leaders astray. In the end, de Gaulle was a paradox, a man who stood as both a symbol of unity and a source of division. His life was a testament to the complexities of leadership, where the line between hero and antagonist often blurs. For those who admired him, he was the embodiment of French resilience and resolve. For others, he was a reminder of the dangers of authoritarianism cloaked in patriotism. Charles de Gaulle passed away on November 9, 1970, leaving behind a legacy as towering as his physical stature. His death marked the end of an era, yet his influence endures, woven into the very fabric of French history. De Gaulle's story is one of monumental ambition, relentless determination, and the enduring quest for national greatness. It's a saga that continues to captivate and confound, much like the man at its center. So, here's to Charles de Gaulle, a towering figure whose shadow still stretches across the landscape of time. His life was a kaleidoscope of triumphs and trials, a reminder that history is as much about the people who shape it as the events themselves. And as we bid adieu to this chapter, one thing is certain. De Gaulle's legacy, like a fine French wine, will only grow richer with age. On a lake where you'd least expect a metropolis to sprout, Tenochtitlan emerged like a lotus from the muck, defying both the odds and the swampy terrain. Welcome to the 14th century, where the Mexica tribe decided that building a city smack dab in the middle of Lake Texcoco was a brilliant idea. Spoiler alert, they were right. By 1325, the foundations of what would become the heart of the Aztec Empire were set in place, proving that sometimes it pays to be a little unconventional. Now, if your mental image of Tenochtitlan involves Aztec warriors lounging around in feathered headdresses, think again. This was no mere village of mud huts or a quaint gathering of thatched roofs. Picture a bustling urban hub, a veritable Venice of the New World, complete with an intricate network of canals and causeways that would make any city planner swoon. The city was organized with military precision, which makes sense considering it was built by a tribe whose name, Mexica, would eventually lend itself to the entire nation of Mexico. Let's talk logistics. The city's layout was something out of a Mesoamerican dreamscape, with causeways stretching up to 5 miles, connecting the island city to the mainland. These causeways weren't just random paths. They were meticulously planned to control traffic and facilitate trade. And boy, did they trade. Tenochtitlan was the epicenter of commerce, with its bustling markets attracting traders from all over Mesoamerica. This wasn't just a place where you could haggle for a nice piece of obsidian. You could acquire everything from exotic bird feathers to cacao beans, the ancient version of a Starbucks run. The canals themselves were more than just scenic waterways. They were vital arteries for transportation and communication. Imagine gondolas, but swap the Italian serenades for the rhythmic paddling of canoes filled with goods and people. These waterways weren't just practical. They were the lifeblood of the city, dictating how people interacted and conducted business. And in a society where social hierarchy was everything, where you lived in relation to these waterways could say a lot about your status. In Tenochtitlan, location was everything. Real estate envy isn't a modern invention. But how did the Mexica come to settle in this aquatic paradise, you ask? Well, according to legend, it all started with a vision. The guards supposedly told the Mexica to find a new home where they would see an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a snake. This sign appeared on a swampy island in Lake Texcoco, and the rest, as they say, is history. Of course, it sounds like a romantic myth, but there's something to be said for the audacity of building a city in such an inhospitable place. It's as if someone looked at the Everglades and said, yeah, a skyscraper would look great right there. This divine mandate, or at least the Mexica's interpretation of it, set the groundwork for a society where the guards were never far from people's minds or their politics. Religion and governance were as intertwined as the vines in a jungle, with the city's layout reflecting cosmic order. The Templo Mayor, or Great Temple, rose at the city's center, a testament to both religious devotion and architectural prowess. It wasn't just a place of worship. It was the spiritual and political heart of the empire, where rituals ensured the sun would rise and the rain would fall. And you thought your morning coffee routine was important. What makes Tenochtitlan truly fascinating is how this city's social structure was as layered as one of their pyramid temples. At the top were the nobles, the Pipiltin, who were the movers and shakers, wielding political power and directing military campaigns. Beneath them were the commoners, known as macehualtin, who did the heavy lifting, literally. They were the farmers, craftsmen, and warriors who kept the city running. But let's not romanticize the past too much. Life wasn't all feathered headdresses and chocolate. The social hierarchy was rigid, with little room for upward mobility. Your birth determined your fate as surely as the stars determined the Aztec calendar. Yet, it wasn't just about who you were. It was about where you fit into the grand scheme of things. The Calpuli, or neighborhood clans, were the building blocks of Aztec society, each governed by its own council and responsible for its members. These clans provided not just identity, but also a support network, a bit like extended families on steroids. They were the original social safety net, ensuring that everyone had a place, even if it was a very specific and unmovable place. As we peel back the layers of Tenochtitlan's social structure, it becomes clear that this wasn't just a city. It was an organism, a living, breathing entity that thrived on order and hierarchy. From the grand temples to the bustling markets, every aspect of life was orchestrated with precision. The Mexica didn't just build a city. They constructed a society that would leave an indelible mark on history, one that continues to intrigue and inspire. So, the next time you hear about the Aztecs, remember that beneath the feathers and the myths was a civilization as complex and compelling as any in history. Now, as we delve deeper into the glittering world of Tenochtitlan's upper crust, prepare yourself to meet the megastars of the Aztec universe. Picture the Tenochtitlan, the emperor himself, as the ultimate Mesoamerican influencer. This guy wasn't just a ruler, he was practically a god in human form, or at least that's what he wanted everyone to believe. Moctezuma Roman II, who reigned from 1502 to 1520, didn't just have power, he had a divine endorsement. Or so the story goes, because nothing screams legitimacy like claiming the gods are your personal cheerleaders. But let's not get too carried away by the glitz without peeking behind the curtain. The Tenochtitlan's role was a high-wire act of diplomacy, warfare, and keeping the gods appeased. His power was as much about smoke and mirrors as it was about realpolitik. Moctezuma, for instance, was less a despot and more a master of ceremonies, orchestrating grand rituals that would make a modern Super Bowl halftime show look like amateur hour. He had a knack for combining religious fervor with political theater, ensuring his subjects were both awed and slightly terrified. Speaking of ceremonies, the Aztec priests were the original event planners, hosting lavish affairs that could last for days. These weren't your typical wine and dine shindigs. We're talking about elaborate rituals involving human sacrifice. Yep, the priests were the rock stars of ritual, and their gigs were epic, albeit a bit bloodier than your average concert. They believed these sacrifices were necessary to keep the sun rising and the world turning, a belief that added layers of urgency and drama to their already high-stakes performances. Of course, all this grandeur came at a cost, literally. The upper echelons of Aztec society were fueled by an economy that relied heavily on tribute. Think of it as a complex system of taxes, but instead of cash, it involved goods like textiles, crops, and even exotic animals. This tribute system was the economic engine that kept the Aztec elite in power, allowing the nobility to live in opulence while ensuring the emperor's coffers were perpetually overflowing. Imagine modern-day celebrities with their entourages and lavish lifestyles. The Aztec nobility had their own versions, complete with sprawling estates and enough gold to make a dragon envious. But here's the twist. While the nobles basked in luxury, they were also bound by an intricate web of obligations and alliances. This was no carefree existence. The political machinations resembled a high-stakes chess game where every move was calculated, and one wrong step could cost you everything. Marriages were strategic alliances, and every noble family had to constantly maneuver to maintain their status. It was a world where your lineage and connections mattered as much as your wealth, and social climbing was both an art and a survival skill. Now, let's debunk a common myth, the notion of the Aztec ruler as an omnipotent tyrant. It's easy to imagine the Tenochtitlan as a solitary figure ruling with an iron fist, but reality was more nuanced. The emperor was part of a council, a group of high-ranking nobles who advised and occasionally challenged him. This was less a dictatorship and more a delicate balance of power, where the emperor had to keep his allies close and his enemies closer. In this world of political intrigue, the line between divine right and human cunning was as blurred as the reflection on a stormy lake. The Tenochtitlan might have claimed divine backing, but his real power lay in his ability to navigate the treacherous waters of Aztec politics. And while the priests might have wielded spiritual authority, they were also the keepers of knowledge and tradition, ensuring that the social order remained as rigid as the stone temples that dotted the city. Let's pause for a moment to appreciate the irony. In a society where the gods were believed to control everything, human ambition and strategy were the real driving forces. The Aztecs understood that, while divine favor was nice, having a well-stocked granary and a loyal army were far more practical. It's a reminder that even in a world steeped in mythology, human nature remains a constant, ambitious, resourceful, and occasionally ruthless. As we continue to unravel the layers of Aztec society, remember that beneath the gilded veneer of the nobility lay a complex and dynamic system, one that was as much about survival as it was about splendor. This was a world where power was never absolute, and where every player in the game had to be as cunning as a jaguar and as adaptable as a reed in the wind. So next time you picture the Aztec elite in their feathered finery, think of them not just as relics of the past, but but as the original masters of the art of the deal. With the Aztec elite strutting around like the original influencers, it's easy to forget the backbone of Tenochtitlan wasn't made of gold or feathers, but of bustling marketplaces and industrious hands. Welcome to the gritty, vibrant world of the Parchdecker and the artisans, Aztec society's middle class, who were as crucial as they were colorful. First up, let's talk Parchdecker. These were the rockstar merchants, the guys who turned trade into an art form and pretty much owned the ancient Mesoamerican version of Wall Street. Picture them as a mix between savvy traders and daring adventurers, crisscrossing the region with caravans of goods that would make modern logistics companies green with envy. They didn't just ply their trade in Tenochtitlan's own massive marketplace at Tenochtitlan, but ventured far beyond, reaching places like the Gulf Coast and even towards what is now Central America. We're talking hundreds of miles on foot or by canoe, all in the name of commerce. These weren't your average door-to-door salesmen. They were the diplomatic corps, cultural ambassadors, and intelligence gatherers rolled into one. Now, Tenochtitlan wasn't just any marketplace. It was the beating heart of the Aztec economy, pulsing with the energy of thousands of traders and customers every day. Think of it as an ancient megamall, but with more feathers and fewer food courts. On a typical day, up to 60,000 people could be found hustling in this commercial hub, making it arguably the largest market in the pre-Columbian Americas. Here, you could buy everything from the mundane, corn and beans, to the magnificent, turquoise jewelry and jaguar pelts. It was the place where social classes mingled, deals were struck, and fortunes were made or lost. And if you thought the New York Stock Exchange was chaotic, imagine the cacophony of bartering in multiple languages, with the fragrant scent of cacao mingling with the sharper aroma of smoked fish. The Parchdeckers' role wasn't just economic. These merchants had a hand in cultural exchanges that were as rich as the goods they traded. They were the conduits through which ideas, technologies, and customs flowed, knitting together the diverse tapestry of Mesoamerican societies. Their journeys opened up channels for the spread of not just luxury items, but also agricultural techniques, artistic styles, and even religious practices. They were the ancient world's version of the Internet, connecting distant lands and facilitating a cultural download that enriched every corner of the Aztec Empire. But here's the kicker. Despite their undeniable importance, the Parchdecker walked a fine line between being respected and envied. Their wealth and influence set them apart from the common folk, but they weren't quite noble enough to be Pippleton. It's like being the most successful startup founder in a room full of old money. Impressive, sure, but you might not get invited to every exclusive dinner party. Yet, their unique position allowed them to wield considerable power. They even had their own guilds and could influence political decisions, which in a society so rigidly stratified was no small feat. Now, let's pivot to the artisans, the creative geniuses who transformed raw materials into objects of beauty and utility. These folks were the unsung heroes of Aztec society, the ones who turned the ordinary into the extraordinary. From skilled potters and weavers to the goldsmiths who crafted intricate jewelry and the feather workers who produced the dazzling costumes for the elite, artisans were the lifeblood of cultural expression. Their work wasn't just about aesthetics. It was deeply intertwined with religious and social significance. Imagine crafting a headdress that wasn't just a fashion statement, but a spiritual offering or a ceremonial vessel that was as much a work of art as it was a tool for sacred rites. Artisans thrived in a society where craftsmanship was highly valued and their goods were in constant demand. They were the creative class, the ones who could turn a chunk of obsidian into a razor-sharp blade or a piece of clay into a vessel worthy of a king's table. Their work didn't just fill homes, it filled temples, marketplaces, and palaces, leaving an indelible mark on Aztec culture. And in a world where everything was infused with layers of meaning, their creations were as much about storytelling as they were about functionality. Yet, despite their skills and contributions, artisans also navigated a complex social landscape. They were considered part of the commoner class, the Macehualtin, but their talents afforded them a certain degree of prestige. It's the classic tale of being essential but underappreciated. Ask any modern graphic designer or coder. They lived in a world where their craft could elevate their status, but never quite enough to break the rigid social ceiling. They were the makers, the dreamers, and the doers, vital to the empire's economy, but forever dancing to the tune of the elite's whims. The Parchdecker and artisans share a narrative that resonates with the story of today's entrepreneurs and creative professionals. Both are driven by a mix of passion and pragmatism, navigating a world that values innovation, yet often resists change. They remind us that while social hierarchies may be ancient, the hustle is timeless. They were the ones who kept the wheels of commerce and culture turning, proving that in Tenochtitlan, as in any great city, it's the middle layers that hold it all together. As we continue to explore this ancient metropolis, remember that the story of Tenochtitlan is not just a tale of emperors and warriors, but of the vibrant, bustling life that thrived in its markets and workshops. It's a reminder that history is as much about the everyday people as it is about the grand narratives, and that in the dance of power and commerce, everyone has a role to play. So next time you think of the Aztecs, picture not just their rulers, but also the merchants and artisans who made Tenochtitlan a city of dreams, ambition, and relentless creativity. And now, onto the unsung heroes of Tenochtitlan, the commoners and slaves, the real MVPs who kept this megacity humming like a well-oiled obsidian blade. Imagine a society where your morning commute involved paddling a canoe through bustling canals, not struggling with traffic on the freeway, and where the daily grind was less about spreadsheets and more about tribute demands and survival. The commoners, or Macehualtin, were the backbone of Aztec society. Think of them as the 99%, if you will. These were the farmers, builders, and laborers whose sweat and toil sustained the city's grandeur. They were the ones who transformed the swampy land into fertile chinampas, those famous, floating gardens that turned shallow parts of Lake Texcoco into agricultural powerhouses. Talk about ecological innovation. These guys were the original green thumbs, producing up to 7 crops a year on fertile soil that seemed to defy nature itself. Yet, despite their essential role, the life of a commoner was anything but glamorous. They worked under the shadow of a rigid social hierarchy that made the British class system look like a casual get-together. Social mobility, not exactly a thing. The Macehualtin were born into their roles, and breaking free from those predetermined paths was about as likely as a canoe sprouting wings. Then there were the tribute demands, a system that makes modern tax codes seem like a friendly suggestion. The Aztec Empire was built on a foundation of tribute, with conquered regions required to deliver a never-ending supply of goods. Picture this. Every 80 days, tribute collectors would descend on villages like clockwork, expecting everything from maize to exotic feathers, and anything less than full compliance could lead to some decidedly unfriendly consequences. It's like having an overzealous HOA president who insists your lawn always look pristine, but with a lot more at stake. Yet, while the demands were harsh, they weren't arbitrary. This system was the empire's lifeline, fueling both the economic and ceremonial engines of Aztec society. Tribute wasn't just about keeping the nobility in fancy headdresses. It was about sustaining the elaborate religious ceremonies that were seen as vital to keeping the sun rising and the rain falling. In a world where cosmic order and agricultural productivity were intertwined, the stakes of meeting tribute demands extended beyond mere survival. Now, let's pivot to another crucial cog in the machine, the slaves, or tlacatin. Before you start picturing chains and whips, let's set the record straight. Aztec slavery was a far cry from the brutal chattel slavery of later centuries. Slavery in Tenochtitlan was more like an extreme form of indentured servitude. Sure, slaves were at the bottom of the social ladder, but they weren't entirely without rights. They could own property, marry, and even buy their freedom, assuming they managed to scrape together enough resources. Interestingly, becoming a slave wasn't always a life sentence. Some found themselves in bondage due to debt, a bad luck streak in the gambling pits, or as prisoners of war. But if they played their cards right, freedom was attainable. In a society where fate was often sealed at birth, this tiny glimmer of social mobility was a sliver of hope, albeit a precarious one. Life, as a tlacatin, was tough, no two ways about it. They were the labor force that built the temples, tilled the fields, and served the households of the elite. Yet their presence was integral to the city's functioning. The harsh reality was that while the Aztec cityscape dazzled with its temples and marketplaces, it was the tlacatin who often made it all possible. Their hands crafted the very foundations of Tenochtitlan's splendor, their stories weaving into the city's intricate tapestry. And here's a myth that needs busting: the idea of the Aztecs as mere barbarians who glorified in bloodshed. Yes, human sacrifice was part of their religious practices, but to dismiss them as bloodthirsty savages is to ignore the complexity of their society. Sacrifices were seen as necessary gifts to the gods, acts that, while brutal to modern eyes, were deeply ingrained in their cosmology and viewed as essential for maintaining the balance of the universe. It wasn't mindless violence. It was ritual theater, a communion with the divine that underscored the fragility of human existence. In Tenochtitlan, the divine and the mundane intertwined in a dance as intricate as any court ceremony. Every citizen, from the lowliest slave to the highest noble, played a part in this cosmic drama. It was a world where the stakes were as high as the pyramids, where daily life was a constant negotiation between human agency and the whims of the gods. As we peel back the layers of this ancient society, the picture that emerges is one of diversity and contradiction. The Aztecs were warriors and farmers, builders and dreamers, their lives marked by both splendor and hardship. Their social structure was a testament to human complexity, a reminder that beneath the grandeur of empires, it's the ordinary people who carry the weight of greatness on their shoulders. So next time you think of Tenochtitlan, don't just picture the feathered nobility or the priests in their ceremonial garb. Remember the commoners and the slaves, the unseen heroes who kept the city alive and thriving. Their stories are woven into the very fabric of history, a testament to resilience and ambition in the face of a world that was as demanding as it was magnificent. Keep that thought in mind as we prepare to dive into the final chapter of this grand tale, where we'll uncover the forces that ultimately shaped the destiny of this remarkable civilization. As we prepare to dive into the final chapter of this grand tale, let's unravel the forces that ultimately unraveled Tenochtitlan in 1521, a story that combines high drama, societal tensions, and a hefty dose of external pressures. In other words, a real-life Game of Thrones, minus the dragons, but with plenty of intrigue. The fall of Tenochtitlan was like watching a grand tapestry unravel, thread by thread. You could say it started long before Hernan Cortés and his band of merry conquistadors arrived in 1519, wielding steel and diseases like a twisted gift basket. At its height, the city was a flourishing metropolis of around 200,000 people, a bustling hub that rivaled any European city of its day. But beneath its vibrant surface, Tenochtitlan was a pressure cooker of social tensions and political maneuvering, with cracks that ran deep within its intricate social structure. Let's start with the social tensions. The Aztec Empire, while impressive, wasn't exactly a united front. It was more of a patchwork quilt of city-states held together by a complex web of alliances and tributes. The Mexica, who called Tenochtitlan home, were essentially the head honchos, but not everyone was thrilled about paying tribute to them. Many of the conquered tribes and city-states were resentful, seeing the Mexica as oppressive overlords rather than benevolent rulers. It's the classic tale of the underdog wanting to topple the kingpin, and when Cortés showed up, he wasn't just any old invader. He was a golden opportunity. Enter Cortés, the cunning Spanish conquistador with a knack for persuasion and a penchant for gold. He landed on the eastern coast with about 600 soldiers, a handful of horses, and a game plan that could rival the best strategists. Cortés wasn't just fighting with brute force. He was playing chess on a grand scale, leveraging the discontent among the Aztec subjects to his advantage. His most significant move, forming alliances with disgruntled tribes like the Tlaxcalans, who were all too eager to help topple their Aztec oppressors. It's like teaming up with the office underdogs to take down the overbearing boss, only with more blood and fewer passive-aggressive emails. The initial meeting between Moctezuma II and Cortés was a spectacle of diplomatic theater. Moctezuma, perhaps believing Cortés to be the returning god Quetzalcoatl, welcomed him into the city with a mix of awe and trepidation. Talk about rolling out the red carpet for your future conqueror. But let's not oversimplify. Moctezuma wasn't just a naive ruler blinded by prophecy. He was a savvy leader navigating a volatile political landscape, trying to make the best of an impossible situation. Unfortunately, his attempts at diplomacy were like trying to stop a tidal wave with a sandcastle. Once inside the city, Cortés played his cards with ruthless efficiency. He took Moctezuma hostage, a move that sent shockwaves through the Aztec elite. Imagine if someone waltzed into your city and took the mayor hostage. Only in this case, the mayor was considered semi-divine. This audacious act created a power vacuum and set off a chain reaction of chaos and confusion among the Aztecs. The Spanish were outnumbered, sure, but they wielded two deadly allies, gunpowder and smallpox. The former shattered Aztec defenses. The latter decimated the population with a brutal efficiency that made medieval plagues look like the common cold. By the time the Spanish forces, bolstered by thousands of indigenous allies, laid siege to Tenochtitlan in May 1521, the city was already on its knees. The siege lasted for 75 grueling days, a brutal grind of starvation, disease, and relentless attacks. The once great city, with its gleaming temples and bustling markets, was reduced to ruins, its inhabitants battered and broken. On August 13, 1521, the city fell, marking the end of the Aztec Empire and the dawn of Spanish colonial rule. It was a tragic finale to a civilization that had once dazzled with its complexity and grandeur. The fall of Tenochtitlan wasn't just a military conquest. It was the collapse of a social order that had been centuries in the making. The rigid hierarchy that had once bound the Aztec society together now tore it apart, as both external pressures and internal strife proved too great to withstand. It's a lesson in the fragility of power, a reminder that even the mightiest empires can crumble under the weight of their own contradictions. But let's not leave it on a note of despair. The legacy of Tenochtitlan endures, woven into the cultural fabric of modern Mexico. The city's ruins lie beneath modern-day Mexico City, a testament to a civilization that dared to dream and build against all odds. The Aztecs left behind a rich heritage of art, architecture, and knowledge that continues to inspire and fascinate. Their story is a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit, the enduring power of culture, and the complex tapestry of history that shapes our world. In contemplating the legacy of Tenochtitlan, we must also confront how history gets romanticized. It's tempting to see the Aztecs as either noble savages or ruthless warriors, to simplify their story into a binary of good versus evil. But history isn't a fairy tale with clear-cut heroes and villains. It's a nuanced narrative full of shades of gray. The truth is, the Aztecs were a complex society capable of both incredible achievements and brutal practices. They were human, and their story is as much about their triumphs as it is about their tragedies. So, what lessons can modern societies learn from the Aztecs? Perhaps it's the importance of adaptability in the face of change, the need for unity amidst diversity, or the danger of letting power go unchecked. Tenochtitlan's fall reminds us that no empire is invincible, and that the very structures that sustain us can also become our undoing if we fail to adapt to new realities. As we wrap up this exploration of Tenochtitlan, let's remember that history is more than just dates and events. It's a living tapestry of human experience, a story that continues to unfold even as we speak. In the end, the tale of Tenochtitlan is a testament to the enduring power of human ambition, creativity, and resilience. So, the next time you find yourself pondering the past, remember that history is not just about what happened, but about the stories we choose to tell and the lessons we choose to learn. And with that, we've reached the end of our journey through the storied streets of Tenochtitlan, where the echoes of the past continue to resonate, challenging us to reflect, to learn, and to dream. If Jane Austen had a smartphone, she'd probably be live tweeting from the drawing room, serving up biting commentary on the latest village gossip with a side of social critique. But alas, Austen lived in the late 18th century, where the closest thing to a viral post was a particularly juicy letter sent via horseback. Born in 1775, Jane Austen grew up in a world that was rigidly structured, socially stratified, and let's be honest, a bit obsessed with marriage markets. In Austen's England, the social hierarchy was about as flexible as a cast-iron skillet. The British class system was a tangled web of titles, land ownership, and social standings that could give today's celebrity culture a run for its money. Jane Austen maneuvered through this world like a seasoned chess player, her pen as her rook, capturing the absurdities of the time with a sharpness that could slice through any barnet. The Austens weren't exactly rolling in dough, but they weren't scraping the bottom of the barrel either. Jane's father, George Austen, was a clergyman earning an annual income of about £600. Now, let's put this in perspective. £600 back then would equate to roughly £50,000 today, enough to keep the family afloat, but not enough to buy a mansion with a moat. This comfortable yet modest income placed them in the gentry class, a notch below the aristocracy, but definitely above the common folk. Jane Austen's early life was steeped in the genteel poverty of a family rich in ideas, but not in resources. She was the seventh of 8 children. Yes, her mother was a bit of a powerhouse, considering the era's high child mortality rates and lack of epidurals. Jane was particularly close to her sister Cassandra, forming a duo that could rival any Regency-era buddy movie. The sisters shared everything, from secrets to clothes, and remained inseparable until Jane's untimely death. Education for girls in Austen's time was more about preparing them to be decorative additions to a man's home than independent thinkers. But the Austens were a bit of an anomaly. George Austen believed in educating his daughters, which was about as fashionable as wearing socks with sandals in the 18th century. Jane was encouraged to read widely, from the classics to the latest novels, and she quickly developed a penchant for storytelling that would make her a literary legend. Her family's home in Steventon, Hampshire, was both a refuge and a social hub. Picture a bustling household where ideas were exchanged as freely as cups of tea. It's here that Jane began to observe the quirks of human behavior that would later populate her novels. The Austens hosted guests, engaged in lively discussions, and participated in local social events, which provided Jane with a front-row seat to the dramas of rural gentry life. Now, let's bust some myths. You might think of Jane Austen as a reclusive lady scribbling away by candlelight, untouched by the world outside her window. In reality, she was deeply embedded in the fabric of her community, keenly aware of its rituals and contradictions. She wasn't just a passive observer. She was an active participant, attending balls and gatherings, where the dance cards were just as much about social maneuvering as they were about actual dancing. The economic realities of the time were stark, and the pressure to marry well was more intense than a Regency-era corset. For women, marriage was often the only viable career path, a union of financial necessity rather than romantic inclination. Jane's own experiences with love and courtship were as complex as any of her heroines. She famously accepted, then rejected, a proposal from Harris Bigwither in 1802. It was a pragmatic match, given his wealth and status, but Austen apparently decided she'd rather be single than settle for anything less than a Mr. Darcy-level romance. Austen's novels reflect the economic and social dynamics she observed, critiquing the institution of marriage while acknowledging its economic imperatives. Her characters often face a delicate balance between love and financial security, a theme that resonates as much today as it did then. Elizabeth Bennet, for example, navigates the tricky terrain of marrying for love in a world where a good match is as much about pounds as passion. Jane Austen's world was one of contradictions, where genteel women were expected to be both accomplished and compliant, where social mobility was limited yet constantly desired. Through her sharp wit and keen observations, Austen peeled back the genteel veneer to reveal the absurdities beneath, crafting stories that continue to captivate readers centuries later. Her early life and the society she navigated were the crucibles that shaped her voice, a voice that remains as fresh and biting today as it was in the drawing rooms of Regency England. Austen's literary career began not with a bang, but with a quiet shuffle of papers and the soft scratch of a quill in the candle-lit rooms of her family home. If you think Jane's journey to publication was a leisurely stroll through a garden maze, think again. It was more like navigating a labyrinth of rejection, societal expectations, and the peculiar quirks of the 19th century publishing world, where the stakes were higher than a Regency-era hairdo. Let's start with a little-known fact. Jane Austen was a fan of anonymity. Her first published novel, Sense and Sensibility, hit the shelves in 1811, but you wouldn't find her name on the cover. Instead, it was attributed to a lady. It's the literary equivalent of a modern-day Twitter egg profile, but with a touch more elegance. This wasn't just a quirky choice. It was a strategic move. Women writers of the time were often dismissed or, worse, belittled. By concealing her identity, Austen could sidestep the gender bias that was as entrenched as a dowager at a tea party. Publishing a book back then was a bit like funding a Kickstarter project. Authors often had to pay for the printing themselves, a gamble that could either lead to literary immortality or financial ruin. And Jane was no exception. The cost for printing Sense and Sensibility was around £150, a hefty sum given the Austens' income. This was equivalent to about £10,000 today, not exactly pocket change. The risk was real, but Jane had confidence in her wit and wisdom, hoping her words would capture the hearts and wallets of the reading public. And capture she did. The book was a modest success, selling out its first print run of 750 copies. It wasn't exactly Harry Potter numbers, but it was enough to encourage her to keep writing. The financial returns were also decent. Jane earned £140 from the sales, a tidy sum that was reinvested into her next project. All of this, of course, was managed discreetly, as if she were conducting a covert operation in the world of letters. The landscape of publishing during Austen's time was a mix of opportunity and peril. The technology of the printing press had been around for centuries, but it was the Industrial Revolution that made books more accessible, much like how streaming services have democratized film and music today. However, this accessibility came with its own set of challenges, especially for women. The literary marketplace was dominated by men, and the idea of a female novelist was as unsettling to some as a ghost at a garden party. Jane's next big leap was Pride and Prejudice, published in 1813. This time, the book was attributed to the author of Sense and Sensibility, a subtle nod to her growing reputation. The novel was a hit, and readers were drawn to Elizabeth Bennet's sharp tongue and Mr. Darcy's brooding charm. But let's not romanticize it too much. Getting published wasn't just about talent. It was also about timing, connections, and a sprinkle of good luck. Austen's relationship with her publishers was as strategic as a game of chess. She worked with Thomas Egerton, a former army officer turned publisher, who recognized the potential in her manuscripts. Egerton, based in London's fashionable Whitehall district, was willing to take a chance on a lady writer. His support was crucial, but make no mistake, this was a business relationship. Egerton wasn't running a charity. He was in it for the profit. The financial arrangements were precarious. Austen didn't receive a flat fee for her work. Instead, she was given a share of the profits, a risky venture that placed her financial fate in the hands of the book-buying public. It's a bit like today's world, where authors often depend on royalties and advances, except back then, the margins were as thin as the paper they printed on. Despite these hurdles, Jane's wit and wisdom shone through. Her novels were a reflection of her keen observations, capturing the nuances of social interaction and the folly of human nature with a deft hand. Yet, she faced obstacles that would make any aspiring writer wince. Beyond the gender bias, there was the issue of piracy. Yes, book piracy was a thing, and unauthorized copies of novels were as common as counterfeit handbags on a street corner. The societal expectations of the time also loomed large. Austen was writing in a world where women were expected to marry, bear children, and leave the writing to the menfolk. Her choice to remain unmarried and pursue a literary career was as radical as a rock star smashing a guitar. There's a persistent myth that Jane was a lonely spinster, tucked away from the world. But in truth, she was surrounded by family, friends, and a network of correspondents who supported her work. As we look back on her journey, it's clear that Austen's literary path was as complex and layered as one of her novels. She navigated the challenges of the publishing industry with a mix of pragmatism and passion, all while crafting stories that continue to resonate. Her ability to blend romance with realism, to critique societal norms while spinning tales of love and wit, is what makes her work timeless. The publication of Mansfield Park in 1814 marked another milestone. This novel, often considered one of her more serious works, was a deeper dive into the moral and social fabric of the time. It sold out its first printing, much to the delight of her publisher, and presumably her own satisfaction. But behind the success was a woman who understood the intricacies of her craft and the business that supported it. Austen's navigation of the literary world was a dance between creativity and commerce. and it's a testament to her talent that she managed to keep her footing. She wrote with a sense of purpose, her pen cutting through the conventions of her time with precision and grace. Her work was not merely entertainment, it was a commentary on the world she knew and the people who inhabited it. In the end, Austen's journey was one of resilience and brilliance, marked by the challenges and triumphs of a woman determined to tell her stories. Her legacy is not just in the novels she left behind, but in the barriers she broke and the inspiration she provides to writers of every generation. As we turn the page to her next adventure, let's remember that behind the romantic tales and witty dialogue was a woman who defied expectations and changed the literary landscape forever. Let's dive deeper into the world Jane Austen crafted, one where marriage was as much an economic contract as it was a romantic endeavor. If you thought Tinder was a tough playing field, try navigating the Regency-era marriage market, where your entire future might hinge on a well-timed dance at a ball. Austen's novels are a veritable goldmine of social commentary on these themes, revealing how her characters grapple with the pressures and absurdities of their time. Take Pride and Prejudice, for instance. The opening line is a masterclass in irony. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. This isn't just a catchy hook. It's a biting critique of a society where financial stability is often mistakenly equated with romantic eligibility. Mr. Darcy, with his £10,000 a year, equivalent to about £800,000 today, might as well have been walking around with a neon sign that read, "Eligible Bachelor." But let's not forget that Elizabeth Bennet's sharp wit and refusal to be cowed by money or status were revolutionary. Austen was practically shouting from the rooftops that women had more to offer than just being decorative arm candy. The marriage market wasn't just about romance. It was a high-stakes game of survival. Inheritance laws at the time were as unforgiving as a Regency-era corset. Enter primogeniture, the practice where estates were passed down to the firstborn male heir, leaving daughters scrambling for suitable matches like contestants on a reality TV show. Take the Bennet sisters, for example. With no brothers to inherit their father's estate due to the entailment, they were essentially racing against time to secure their futures. The pressure was real, and the stakes were high. Austen's novels don't just stop at marriage. They delve into money with a shrewdness that would make a Wall Street broker nod in approval. Consider Sense and Sensibility, where the Dashwood sisters face destitution after their half-brother inherits the family estate, leaving them with a meager £500 a year, about £40,000 today. It's a stark reminder of the precarious position women found themselves in, reliant on the goodwill of male relatives or the prospect of marriage to secure their futures. But Austen wasn't the only one writing about these themes. Let's trot over to the Bronte sisters. Although a bit later, they painted similarly gloomy portraits of women at the mercy of men and money. Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, for instance, explores the same theme of financial dependence with a Gothic twist. Jane's inheritance of £20,000, roughly £1. 6 million today, signals a shift from being a governess at the mercy of the whims of the wealthy to having the freedom to choose her own path. Austen and the Brontes were tapping into the same vein of social critique, albeit with different brushes and palettes. And then there's the comedic value of Regency-era courtship. Picture the relentless parade of suitors, each with their own eccentricities and ulterior motives. Mr. Collins from Pride and Prejudice is the kind of character who'd probably send you a dozen roses with a card reading, "You'll thank me one day." His proposal to Elizabeth Bennet is a masterclass in obliviousness, where he offers her a life of stability and status with all the romance of a tax return. Austen's genius lay in turning these absurdities into comedy gold, highlighting the often transactional nature of marriage negotiations. Now, let's address the myth of the swooning damsel. Austen's heroines aren't passive recipients of their fate, they're active participants in their own stories. Elizabeth Bennet, Emma Woodhouse, and Fanny Price all navigate their social worlds with a keen awareness of the stakes involved. Whether it's refusing a marriage proposal or orchestrating a social event, these women are anything but passive. Austen's portrayal of her heroines as sharp-witted, independent thinkers was as revolutionary as a social media influencer shunning brand deals for authenticity. While we're on the topic of myths, let's debunk the notion that Austen's novels are mere romantic escapism. Sure, there are balls, barnets, and brooding gentlemen, but beneath the surface lies a trenchant critique of a society that treated marriage as an economic transaction rather than a romantic union. Austen was exposing the societal norms of her time with the precision of a surgeon wielding a scalpel, not just weaving tales of love and longing. Even the seemingly trivial details in Austen's novels reflect the societal pressures and economic realities of her time. Consider the elaborate social rituals, like the formal visits and letters that dictated the tempo of courtship. In Emma, the titular character's matchmaking schemes unfold through a series of social gatherings and tete-a-tetes that reveal the intricacies of social standing and reputation. These rituals were the social media of their day, where every interaction was scrutinized and every faux pas could lead to social ruin. Austen's novels serve as both a mirror and a magnifying glass, reflecting the societal pressures of her time while magnifying the absurdities and contradictions within. In Mansfield Park, Fanny Price's journey from impoverished ward to moral compass of the Bertram family highlights the chasm between wealth and virtue. Her steadfastness in the face of temptation and her ultimate rejection of Henry Crawford's advances underscore Austen's belief in integrity over material gain. Through her characters and their stories, Austen laid bare the economic imperatives that drove social interactions and marriage negotiations. Her novels are a testament to her understanding of the human condition, where love and money often dance a complicated waltz. Austen's legacy is not just in the romance she penned, but in the truth she unearthed about the society in which she lived. Each novel was a love letter to the complexities of human nature, wrapped in the elegant prose of a woman who saw the world for what it was and dared to write it down. As we leave Austen's world for now, remember that her stories are not just tales of love and marriage. They are intricate tapestries woven with the threads of social critique, economic realities, and the indomitable spirit of women navigating a world that often underestimated them. Stay tuned for more revelations as we continue to unravel the legacy of this literary icon. For Jane Austen, the legacy she left behind is like a fine wine, improving with age and gaining complexity over time. While she was crafting her tales of Regency-era romance and societal satire, she could hardly have imagined the fervor that would one day surround her name. Fast forward a couple of centuries, and Austen has become a literary rock star, her novels spawning a fandom more devoted than a Janet at a book club meeting. Let's kick things off with some numbers. During her lifetime, Austen's books sold modestly. Pride and Prejudice moved about 500 copies in its first year of publication. Not exactly bestseller material, but enough to keep the ink flowing and the creditors at bay. It wasn't until the late 19th century, decades after her death, that Austen's work began to gain traction. By 1870, thanks to a biographical sketch by her nephew, James Edward Austen Leigh, and a growing Victorian nostalgia for the genteel past, her reputation began its steep ascent. Enter the 20th century, where Austen's novels found themselves thrust into the academic spotlight. Scholars and critics dissected her work like a frog in a high school biology class, uncovering layers of social critique and feminist undertones that resonated with the changing times. The post-war era saw Austen canonized as a staple of English literature curricula, with her novels becoming required reading in classrooms around the world. By the 1970s, Austen's works were entrenched in the literary canon, as unavoidable as taxes and just as influential. But let's not forget the pop culture juggernaut that Austen has become. You can't throw a bonnet these days without hitting a Pride and Prejudice adaptation from the famous 1995 BBC miniseries starring Colin Firth as the brooding Mr. Darcy, who emerges from a lake in a scene that launched 1,000 swoons, to the 2005 Keira Knightley film. Austen's novels have been adapted more times than a classic rock song covered by garage bands. Each adaptation brings its own flavor, from Bollywood's Bride and Prejudice to the zombie-infested Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. Yes, even the undead can't resist the allure of the Bennet sisters. Austen's influence isn't confined to film and television. Her work has inspired countless literary spin-offs and reinterpretations. Books like Bridget Jones's Diary by Helen Fielding take the essence of Austen's narrative and transplant it to modern settings, complete with all the neuroses and quirks of contemporary life. Austen's ability to capture the universal themes of love, class, and self-discovery makes her stories as relevant today as they were when they were penned by candlelight. Now, let's talk fandom. The term Janet, originally coined by critic George Saintsbury in 1894, refers to Austen's most fervent admirers. These devotees have formed societies, organized conferences, and hosted Regency-themed balls, where the dance cards and Empire waistlines are as authentic as a museum exhibit. Jane Austen Society of North America, JASNA, founded in 1979, boasts thousands of members who gather annually to discuss Austen's work, don period costumes, and revel in all things Regency. It's like Comic-Con, but with more lace and fewer capes. But why does Austen continue to captivate? Perhaps it's the timeless nature of her themes or the sharp wit with which she skewers societal norms. Her characters, with their flaws and virtues, are as real today as they were in the drawing rooms of 19th century England. Elizabeth Bennet's quest for love and independence, juxtaposed against the economic pressures of her time, mirrors the struggles of countless individuals navigating the complexities of modern relationships. Let's not forget the mythologized version of Austen herself, a romanticized figure often portrayed as the solitary genius, scribbling away in isolated splendor. The truth, however, is less glamorous. Austen's life was marked by modest means and familial obligations. She never married, lived largely dependent on her family, and her literary career, though respectable, was far from the dizzying heights of success we associate with her name today. Her novels were published anonymously, and she earned only about £600 in total from her work, roughly equivalent to £45,000 today, not exactly the earnings of a literary giant. Yet this gap between the myth and the reality only adds to her allure. Austen's ability to transcend her circumstances and create stories that resonate with universal truths speaks to the power of her voice. She was a trailblazer, embodying the spirit of independence and resilience that her heroines so often display. Her keen observations on society's fickle nature and her ability to find humor in the absurdities of life have cemented her as a literary icon whose influence shows no signs of waning. In examining the disparity between Austen's life and her posthumous fame, we uncover a deeper narrative about the nature of literary success. Her modest achievements during her lifetime contrast sharply with the adulation she receives today, raising questions about how we value art and the artists who create it. The enduring fascination with Austen's work reveals as much about our own cultural landscape as it does about hers. Her stories, with their intricate dance of romance and realism, continue to offer a window into the human condition, inviting us to explore the delicate balance between societal expectations and personal desires. As we wrap up this part of Austen's story, remember that her legacy is far more than the sum of its adaptations and fan clubs. It's a testament to the enduring power of storytelling and the ability of a solitary voice to echo through the ages, touching the hearts of readers across centuries. Austen's world, with its vivid characters and sharp wit, remains alive and well, inviting us to step into the ballroom and join the dance. And who knows what new forms her influence will take as we continue to reinterpret and celebrate her work in the years to come. Stay tuned, because the next chapter in Austen's lasting impact is just a page away. Part 5, so. As we turn the final page on Jane Austen's tale, it's clear that her legacy is woven into the fabric of modern literature, like a particularly cheeky stitch. Her influence today is akin to that of a cultural touchstone, a literary lighthouse guiding countless writers through the fog of their own narratives. Austen's sharp wit and biting social commentary have aged better than a fine cheese, and her novels continue to resonate because they tap into the universal truths of human nature. Those pesky little quirks that haven't changed much since the days of Empire waistlines and horse-drawn carriages. Let's get something straight. Austen wasn't just the queen of romantic escapades. She was a master of the social experiment, dissecting the human condition with surgical precision. Her novels are a deep dive into the socio-economic realities of her time, where love and money were as entwined as a Regency-era dance couple. Take Mansfield Park, where Fanny Price's moral compass navigates the choppy waters of wealth and privilege. Her story isn't just about finding love. It's an examination of virtue versus materialism, a theme that echoes in our consumer-driven society today. And speaking of timeless truths, let's debunk the myth of Austen as a lonely spinster. Sure, she never married, but this wasn't some tragic tale of unrequited love. Austen was a savvy operator who understood the constraints of her era and chose her path accordingly. Her decision to remain single was less about missed opportunities and more about a conscious refusal to settle for less than what she wanted, an inspiration for anyone navigating modern dating apps. In fact, her single status allowed her the freedom to write without the pressures of domesticity. Imagine trying to pen Pride and Prejudice while managing a household and a gaggle of children. Now, let's talk about Austen's influence on modern literature, which is as pervasive as the smell of a freshly brewed cup of tea. Writers like Helen Fielding, with her Bridget Jones's Diary, have taken Austen's archetypes and spun them into contemporary narratives that mirror our own societal pressures. The awkwardness of a dinner party or the complexities of a family gathering are as relevant now as they were in Austen's day, proving that human dynamics are a constant in the chaotic symphony of life. But Austen's impact doesn't stop at the written word. She's infiltrated every corner of pop culture, from film and TV adaptations to online forums where fans debate the merits of Mr. Darcy's various incarnations. Her stories have inspired a global movement of Jannates who celebrate her work with the fervor of a die-hard sports fan. Whether it's a Regency-themed ball or a spirited discussion at a book club, Austen's legacy lives on through the community she's inspired. In recent years, Austen's novels have been reinterpreted through a diverse lens, opening the door for conversations about race, gender, and class. Authors like Uzma Jalaluddin with Ayesha at Last, and Sonia Kamal's Unmarriageable, have reimagined her tales in settings as varied as modern-day Toronto and Pakistan, showcasing how Austen's themes transcend cultural boundaries. These retellings highlight the adaptability of Austen's narratives and their ability to resonate across different contexts. From a historical perspective, Austen's work provides a crucial insight into the societal norms of the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Her novels are a goldmine for historians seeking to understand the intricacies of social class, gender roles, and economic pressures of her time. Academics have pored over her texts, analyzing everything from inheritance laws to the role of women in society. Austen's keen observations have turned her novels into valuable historical documents that continue to inform our understanding of the past. As we wrap up this exploration of Austen's legacy, it's important to reflect on why her work remains so relevant. Austen's novels aren't just stories of love and marriage. They're astute examinations of human behavior and societal norms. Her ability to blend romance with realism, to critique the status quo while weaving tales that captivate the imagination, is what makes her work endure. In a world where the only constant is change, Austen's insights into human nature remain a comforting reminder of the timeless dance between love, money, and the social fabric that binds us all. In conclusion, Jane Austen's legacy is a testament to the power of storytelling and the enduring appeal of a well-crafted narrative. Her keen observations and sharp wit have cemented her place in the pantheon of literary greats, and her influence continues to ripple through the pages of modern literature. As we close this chapter on Austen, let's celebrate the woman who dared to defy convention, who wrote with authenticity and insight, and whose stories continue to resonate with readers around the world. Austen's world may be one of bonnets and balls, but her insights into the human condition are as fresh and relevant today as they were when she first put pen to paper. So, here's to Jane Austen, a literary icon whose legacy is as enduring as the love stories she so masterfully crafted.